Some forces don't announce themselves. They hum under everything: money, media, power, and they never sleep. Picture the Lobbyist Secret. Laws drafted in rooms you'll never enter, stamped with your future before you read it. Or the Offshore Money Secret, where wealth vanishes into warm waters and reappears, clean and untouchable. These aren't stories from the past. They're the operating system of the present, deciding outcomes long before we cast a vote or see a headline. So get comfortable, because this is going to be a long one. Laws do not always begin where the cameras are. Often they start in a quiet room with good coffee and better stationery, where a draft appears already polished, complete with talking points and a title that sounds like common sense. That is the Lobbyist Secret. When everyone else is arguing about outcomes, the person who supplies the first language quietly sets the map. Here is how the dance works. A corporation hires seasoned guides who speak fluent government. They build relationships long before a vote ever exists. They host briefings that feel like free education, share white papers that look like homework already done, and show up with bill language written in neat legal paragraphs. Staffers are overwhelmed and exhausted. A ready-made solution looks like help. Insert the draft, adjust a few commas, and now the scaffolding of the law carries the shape of the sponsor who brought it. The pitch rarely sounds self-interested. It is framed as jobs, innovation, safety, competitiveness. The draft carries small edits that matter later, a definition that narrows who counts, an exemption that looks innocent, a timeline that nudges rivals out of the race. The public slogan is broad and benevolent, while the fine print is precise and profitable. By the time debate reaches the floor, the centre of gravity has already shifted. Everyone is arguing inside a house someone else built. Access multiplies influence. The same people who once worked inside government now guide those outside it, smoothing paths with familiar names and calendars full of soft landings. Money arrives as a ribbon of support for campaigns, events, and causes, never quite a direct exchange, always a warm reminder of who has been helpful. When a crisis hits, the first phone call is to the person who already has a binder labelled solutions. Not every lobbyist is a villain. Nurses lobby. Environmental groups lobby. Civil rights advocates lobby. The system listens most to those who show up with clarity, consistency, and text that can be dropped straight into the process. That is the unsettling truth. The pen that writes the first draft often owns the last word. What do you do with that knowledge? Learn to look past the headline to the definitions section. Notice phrases like technical correction and harmonization. They can hide teeth. Ask who authored the text, not just who introduced it. Follow committee work, where amendments are born and buried. Support local reporters and watchdogs who read what most people will not. When you contact a representative, ask for transparency about meetings and sources. Reward the officials who publish calendars, post draft language early, and welcome opposing testimony. Power loves the dark. Sunlight is slow, stubborn, and strangely effective. The more people read the words that govern them and ask who wrote those words, the harder it becomes for a quiet room to decide everything. Imagine a vault with no walls, a door you cannot see, and a key that looks like a piece of paper. That is how the wealthiest hide their money. Not by stacking gold in a basement, but by tucking wealth into places where the rules are thinner, the lights are dimmer, and the questions are quieter. The trick is not magic. It is paperwork, distance, and a maze built to look like the ocean. Here is how the offshore money secret works. You begin with a name that is not your own. A lawyer or a formation agent in a small office creates a company in a faraway place that promises privacy. The shell has directors who never sit at a real desk and shareholders who are there in name only. On paper, it looks normal. In practice, it is a mask. That company opens an account in a bank that is friendly to secrecy, or it owns a trust that owns another company that owns the thing that matters. Each step adds fog. Each layer moves the truth one more arm's length away. The assets are rarely just cash. A yacht is flagged in a quiet registry. An apartment in a famous city is purchased by a company that belongs to another company. Art sits in a climate-controlled warehouse called a free port, never officially crossing a border, never taking a breath of customs air. A private jet is leased by a firm that is owned by a trust whose beneficiaries are unnamed. If someone asks who owns what, the answer points to a mailbox, then to a nominee, then to a law office in another time zone. Some of it is perfectly legal. That is the point. The line between legal tax planning and illegal evasion is thin and flexible. Wealth hires the best minds to find the lightest touch, the narrowest wording, the gap between two laws that do not quite meet. Profits are shifted by charging a local branch high fees for using a brand name held in a low-tax place. A company lends to itself and pays interest to itself in a friendlier jurisdiction, shrinking the bill where the work actually happens. None of it looks dramatic. It is invoices and licenses and contracts that say little and do a lot. Banks say they know their customers. Service providers say they follow the rules. They do, but the rules can be weak and the checks can be surface deep. If a trusted law firm vouches for a client, the questions often stop. If a company is owned by another company, the trail can end with a nominee director who signs dozens of files a day. The system treats that signature as a face, even when the real face stays off stage. When scandals break, you see the machinery in the daylight. Leaked emails, spreadsheet trails, photocopies of passports, diagrams that look like spider webs. The public gasps. Officials promise reforms. Some changes land, some doors close, but the wealth is already moving, like water pouring through new cracks. A haven changes its rules and another one opens its arms. A government tightens one screw and a lobby loosens another. The game is to stay a step ahead of the light. Why does this matter? Because the bill does not vanish. When taxes are avoided in the shadows, someone else pays in the sun. Schools strain, hospitals wait, housing prices twist when homes become financial vaults instead of places to live. Honest businesses lose ground against rivals that float profits to places with softer rules. The message to the world becomes simple and cruel. The map you see is not the map that matters. You can recognize the patterns once you know where to look. A luxury condo owned by a limited company, with an address that leads to a corporate registry on an island. A yacht with a flag that does not match its owner's passport. A charity that is really a foundation with a board you cannot name. A payment that crosses borders for rights to use a logo, at a price that only makes sense when you count the taxes saved. None of these things are proof by themselves, but they are footprints in damp sand. Not every person who goes offshore is a villain. Some are protecting assets from unstable regimes. Some are following advice that feels routine to people in their world, but the effect is the same. A private ladder to a quieter sky, while the rest wait in a crowded lobby. The story is not about envy. It is about power. Secrecy gives power to money. It shields decisions from the communities they affect. It lets a small group of people write their own rules and call that freedom. The offshore money secret survives because it is boring by design. It hides in forms, trusts, registrations, and signatures. It relies on our eyes glazing over. The first defense against that is simple attention. Learn the language of shells and nominees. Ask who benefits, not just who appears on page 1. Follow assets, not statements. Sunlight is slow, but it is undefeated. The vault with no walls cannot keep its treasure forever, not if enough people learn to see the outlines and keep walking toward them. Picture an invisible mixing board of money, with faders labelled patience, panic, and price. And imagine someone you will never meet, nudging them up and down while you sleep. Your rent, your paycheck, the cost of bread and coffee, even the mood of the stock market, all rise and fall with those silent adjustments. That is the secret at the heart of modern life. Central banks pull levers that most people never see, yet everyone can feel. Start with the price of money. It sounds abstract, but it shows up in your mailbox and your bank app. When the guardians of money lower the price of borrowing, loans become easier. Mortgages, car payments, business credit, all feel a gentle push forward. Shops get busier, companies hire, optimism spreads. But there is a catch. More money and more credit can chase the same goods, and prices begin to creep upward. Groceries that were once an afterthought suddenly demand a plan. When they raise that price of borrowing, the pendulum swings back. Debt becomes heavier, spending slows, projects pause, and prices can cool. This one lever, the policy rate, is a dimmer switch for an entire economy. Now look at the levers behind the lever. Central banks do not only speak with rates, they move through markets like a tide. By buying or selling government bonds, they quietly set the tone for long-term borrowing costs. Think of it as shaping the future's weather forecast. If they buy, yields fall, and the breeze of cheap money blows through boardrooms and living rooms alike. If they sell, or simply step away, the air gets heavier, and plans that once looked easy feel suddenly hard. There is another, even softer tool. Words. A single sentence from a central banker can change the temperature of the room. That is not poetry. It is policy called forward guidance. Promise to keep money easy for a while, and investors loosen their collars. Hint that the punch bowl is leaving early, and the party sobers up. Expectations are the ghost lever. They move before anything else does, and they move everything. In the background sits a safety valve few people think about until it matters. When panic hits and trust evaporates, central banks lend against good collateral to steady, shaken institutions. It is the emergency fire hose that prevents a spark in one corner of the system from burning down the neighbourhood. Deciding what counts as safe collateral is yet another lever. Bless a type of asset as safe, and its price rises. Exclude it, and the ground under it can crumble. There are global levers too, hidden in technical pipes that connect currencies across borders. Swap lines and liquidity windows can turn a crisis in one market into a passing storm, or let it swell into something worse. These choices ripple through shipping lanes, factory floors, and kitchen tables thousands of miles away. What looks like a number on a spreadsheet in a capital city becomes the price of cooking oil on another continent. None of this is magic. It is design. Central banks are charged with keeping inflation low and stable, often near a small number you hear again and again, and promoting the health of the economy. They use their balance sheets, their interest rates, their regulations, and their words to keep the machine humming. But a machine so large, adjusted by a handful of hands, creates winners and losers. When money is made cheap, Assets like houses and stocks can jump first and fastest. Those who already own them often feel the warm wind before anyone else. When money tightens, the people who owe the most feel the chill first, sometimes before prices have fallen enough to offer relief. That is the heart of the secret. It is not hidden because someone locked it in a vault. It is hidden because it lives in plain sight, in language that feels distant, and in mechanisms that operate far from day-to-day life. If you have ever wondered why your savings account barely grows in some years and then suddenly offers more, or why a business owner in your town stops hiring, or why your landlord raises the rent rate when everything else feels expensive, you are hearing the echo of those levers. You cannot sit at the mixing board, but you can learn to hear its rhythm. Watch the moments when central bankers gather and speak. Listen for how firmly they talk about future plans, and notice whether they are adding or subtracting from the financial tides that lift and lower long-term rates. Pay attention to inflation reports, not as cold statistics, but as clues about whether money is moving too slowly or too fast. Most of all, remember that the system reacts to emotions as much as it does to equations. Confidence and fear are currents that carry policy farther than the policy itself. The central bank's secret is that the cost of money is a story we all participate in. When enough of us believe it is time to spend, the economy swells. When enough of us think it is time to wait, the economy slows. The levers guide the story, but they do not write every line. Understanding the levers does not give you a map to riches, but it does give you a compass. It helps you ask better questions when a loan looks tempting, when a fixed rate seems worth locking, or when a too-good-to-be-true investment surges on a breeze you cannot feel. The hidden hands will keep moving. Your edge is learning to spot their fingerprints on the world you can touch. The trap rarely looks like a trap. It looks like a welcome discount, a frictionless checkout, a delivery that arrives before you remember you ordered it. It sounds like a friendly chime, feels like one more tap, and promises to save you a few minutes you swear you do not have. The monopoly secret is not brute force at first glance. It is softness. It is convenience. It is training you to stop looking left and right until one day there is nothing left or right to look at. Not just crushing a rival with a price they cannot match, but teaching you to forget that rivals ever existed. Picture a small town where the corner grocer knows every name. A giant opens across the road with aisles that glow and deals that feel unreal. For a while, the grocer smiles through it. Then a supplier calls and says, "We have to pick one master contract." Then a landlord raises the rent because foot traffic shifted. Then a loyal customer whispers, "I am sorry, I will be back when I can, but this is just easier." A few months later, a handwritten sign appears, "Closed on Sundays." A few more, and the windows are dark all week. People do not send flowers to a shuttered storefront. They say, "I wish it were different," and drive to the only place left open late. That is how the story ends. That is also how it begins, somewhere else tomorrow. Psychologically, the move works because habits love the path of least resistance more than they love ideals. A routine becomes automatic. Default settings feel like choices. Our brains reward familiarity, and once the loop is set, the loop defends itself. That is why loss leaders are temporary. Loyalty lasts longer. That is why one click is not a button. It is a behavior. Behind the gleaming storefront, the real game pushes inward. Own the shelf, and you can nudge what people see. Own the warehouse, and you can starve competitors quietly. Own the rails, payment rails, delivery routes, search results, and you can make an entire map tilt in your favour. Not just owning more, owning the gateways, not just undercutting a price, undercutting the patience required to seek an alternative. When the route to an independent maker takes 5 extra taps and a new login, most people will not make the trip. There is another layer. The giant does not need to beat every rival. It can buy the ones who grow too fast, imitate the ones who do something clever, and drown the rest in fees and compliance that look neutral on paper but burn cash in practice. If that fails, it becomes the standard itself. Developers will say, we build for their ecosystem first. Brands will say, we cannot afford to be absent there. Lawmakers will glance at the low prices and think, it seems fine. The moat is not water. The moat is everyone's resignation. If you listen closely, the script repeats with different costumes. A record label becomes a streaming service that tells artists the only way to be discovered is to live inside its playlist. A pharmacy becomes a benefits manager that quietly decides whose pills get approved. A platform becomes a broker, then a market, then the rule book. Each time you think, what a helpful expansion. Each time the circle tightens. Here is the reframing that matters. We were taught to spot monopolies by counting brands on a shelf. But the secret hides in the plumbing. When one company manages the flow of money, of attention, of logistics, it can make a dozen brands look like choice, while they all pay tribute for the right to stand there. That is not just dominance you can see, it is dependence you cannot. And once you understand that, the story shifts from villains and victims to systems and incentives, which is where the real leverage lives. So what can an ordinary person do against a machine that large? Start with one stubborn habit. Compare the default with one alternative once a week. Ask your favourite maker how to buy from them directly. Try a local search term before the platform you always open. It will not feel efficient. It will feel like friction. But choice is supposed to take a breath. Markets need oxygen. For those who build and lead, the question is sharper. Will you make things easy by making the world smaller, or make things better by keeping the lanes open? Power can be used to smooth paths without sealing them. It can be used to earn loyalty, not harvest it. The monopoly secret survives because it hides in the ordinary rituals of a busy day. Learn to notice those rituals, and the shape of the system shows itself. Then, one small switch at a time, you can redraw the map you travel. That is how the spell breaks. That is how an industry becomes many industries again. Bite into a simple sandwich, and you are chewing through a paper trail of invisible taxes you never agreed to. That crunchy lettuce and soft bread came with more than salt and sesame. They came with a quiet cut taken at every stop along the way. Most people never see it because the price tag whispers and the receipt keeps secrets. Here is how it hides. A farmer pays fees to keep the lights on and the trucks running, and those fees ride along in the price of the wheat. The mill pays taxes to turn grain into flour. The bakery pays to keep ovens licensed and inspected, and the store pays to ship, shelf, and scan. By the time you grab lunch, those little slices have been stacked into the price, like layers you cannot peel apart. You hand over your money and think you paid for a sandwich. In truth, you paid for a chain of invisible tolls. This is not just about what you eat. Fill your gas tank, and there is a quiet bite for the road itself. Book a flight, and inside the friendly fare, a handful of charges are tucked like stowaways. Turn on the lights, stream a show, or check your phone bill, and the line items look like alphabet soup. service fees, access fees, regulatory fees, universal this and infrastructure that. Some have the word tax in them, many do not. They do not need to, because they are already inside the price. Companies do not pay taxes so much as pass them along. When a business sees a new expense, it has only a few choices: raise prices, cut wages, reduce quality, or disappear. None of these options put a sign on the door that says you are paying more taxes today. Instead, you get the same product for a little more money, or a little less product for the same money. That family-sized box that quietly lost a few ounces without a discount is not just marketing. It can be a quiet response to rising costs, including taxes, wrapped in cardboard, and hope that you will not notice. And the story continues behind the scenes. To follow the rules, someone has to file papers, keep records, pay experts, and buy software. Those are compliance costs, and they do not come with a ribbon or a thank you. They end up in the price of your coffee, your shoes, and your streaming subscription. Even the time a small shop owner spends on forms instead of customers has a cost, and you feel it as a few extra cents that no one mentions. Think about housing. Your rent is not just a number your landlord dreamed up. Property taxes live inside it, along with permits, inspections, and the fees paid to keep the building up to code. A renter might say, "I do not pay property tax," but the truth is, you pay it every month by another name, because costs do not vanish, they move. Even your paycheck is part of the hidden exchange. An employer sees the full price of hiring you, not just what lands in your bank account. Payroll taxes, benefits requirements, insurance premiums, training, and time spent on paperwork are all part of the bill for one job. When those costs rise, a raise may stall or a position may not open at all. You might never hear the words hidden tax, but you feel it in a missing opportunity that never sends an email. There is also a quiet drain that does not arrive on a bill at all. When the money supply expands and prices drift upward, your savings do less than you planned. Your grocery list buys less than last year, and your future shows up a little lighter than you hoped. Many people call that the silent tax, because no one asks you to write a check. The value just slips away while everything else carries on. So, what can you actually do beyond sighing at the checkout? First, learn to read the story behind a price. Look for the odd lines on your bill. Ask your utility provider what each charge means. Compare receipts from different stores and see who is stacking extras into the tag and who is not. Pay attention to shrinkage in packages and ask yourself whether you are paying the same for less. Choose businesses that show you the breakdown instead of burying it. Transparency is rare because most people do not demand it. But when customers look closely, merchants notice. Second, make a habit of thinking in total cost, not sticker price. That bargain item that needs special batteries, special shipping, and special disposal might not be cheap when all the quiet expenses line up. Sometimes the durable, repairable choice costs more today and much less over time. That is one way to keep the hidden hand from taking more than it should. Third, speak up. When you see junk fees, question them. When your city debates a new charge that sounds tiny, ask where it will land inside the prices you face next year. If you vote, show up with this lens in mind. Most policies are sold by the slice, but you live on the whole loaf. Here is the secret no one tells you. Hidden taxes survive on indifference. They hide in the margins because the margins feel small, but margins add up. A little on the sandwich, a little on the phone bill, a little on the fuel, a little on the apartment, and a little on everything you forgot you pay for until your paycheck shrinks without moving at all. You are not powerless. You can track, question, and choose. You can make the invisible a little more visible, and in the process, keep a few more coins from disappearing between the price tag and your pocket. Picture a key that doesn't open a door, but a person. Not a lock made of metal, but one made of loyalty. Turn it, and a cousin answers a phone, a son signs a contract, an in-law grants a favour. That is the quiet architecture behind so many powerful rooms. You don't see a conspiracy board with red string. You see a family photo, and everyone in that frame holds a piece of the switchboard. The Nepotism Secret is simple and brutal. Keep influence close enough to reach and safe enough to trust. Powerful families place relatives in the jobs that matter most, not only the glamorous ones at the podiums, but the quiet ones in the corridors where policies are drafted, budgets are steered, and calendars are set. A daughter becomes chief of staff, and suddenly every meeting is filtered through a loyal gatekeeper. A brother sits on the board of a bank, and credit lines open when they need to, and close when rivals push forward. A spouse runs a philanthropic foundation that looks generous on paper and moves reputation like a chess piece across the board. A nephew lands a media role, and headlines tilt by a few subtle degrees. It looks like coincidence until the pattern refuses to break. They will call it mentorship. They will call it a pipeline of talent, born and raised in the language of leadership. There will be degrees, awards, and fellowships to give the performance of merit. And to be fair, some of them truly are capable. But capability is not the secret. Proximity is. When trust is the currency and scandal is the risk, you do not gamble on strangers. You place family in the rooms where secrets are heard first, where drafts are edited before they see daylight, where a single calendar conflict can push a vote by a week and change everything. What keeps this machine running is not only favoritism, it is insulation. These roles are shields. A relative in compliance reviews the awkward contract. A cousin in procurement shortlists the right vendors. An in-law in the regulator's office translates warnings into gentle suggestions. No single move feels illegal. Each step is just personal discretion. But the staircase leads up to the same balcony, where the same last names watch the city lights and congratulate themselves on good judgment. Their alliances extend beyond blood. Weddings are not only celebrations, they are mergers. Godparents are not just sentimental. They are early-stage investments in future influence. Holiday dinners can sound like board meetings with better food. And when trouble comes, it is answered not with panic, but with a group chat that reaches across ministries, law firms, newspapers, and universities in a matter of minutes. Statements are drafted. Coverage is framed. A committee chair is told that now is not the time. The damage becomes tomorrow's inconvenience. How do they hide it? They don't, not exactly. They soften it. They put a relative through a prestigious school, so the resume looks like an explanation. They rotate titles often enough that the pattern blurs. They seed talking heads who say every family business is like this, which is true, except this business is the state budget, the legal system, the information pipeline that shapes what millions believe. They repeat the mantra that talent runs in families, which is also true, but so does impunity when no one is allowed to fail publicly. You can see the fingerprints if you know where to look. Names recur in odd places. A last name on a minister's door and an identical last name on the bank underwriting a state project. A conference panel where 3 of the experts share a holiday card. A press release that thanks a foundation with a familiar crest. A crisis where statements from government, industry, and charity sound as if they were written by the same hand, and maybe they were, because that hand belongs to a daughter who edits both the press office draft and the Family Foundation blog. The cost is not abstract. Innovation slows when risk is a family risk. Contracts go to the safe choice, the known quantity, the person who will never embarrass the dining table. Public money flows like a river with invisible banks that curve around friendly orchards and avoid thirsty fields. And ordinary people learn the wrong lesson. That effort matters less than invitation. That doors open not to skill but to lineage. Cynicism becomes the ambient weather and democracies rust from the inside. What breaks the spell is not outrage alone. It is daylight and design. Ask always who sits behind the person who speaks. Trace the assistants, the schedulers, the counsel, the committee clerks. Pay attention to the jobs that do not make headlines, because those are the hinges that swing the heavy doors. Demand conflicts of interest be more than paperwork. When policies are drafted, ask who recuses and who refuses to. When foundations give, demand accounting that tells you whether generosity is also a purchase order wearing a tuxedo. And when you see a surname echo from office to office, do not rush to accuse, but do not look away. Ask the questions that turn the key the other direction. Who interviewed whom? Who became whose gatekeeper? Who answers the phone at midnight? The Nepotism Secret is not magic. It is a map of trust drawn in private, and it works only as long as the rest of us walk it by habit. Stop walking it. Start redrawing it. When influence can no longer stay only where Thanksgiving sits, power has to prove itself in the open, and not just over dessert. If you really want to see how wars are born, do not look for smoke over the horizon. Listen for the quiet click of a pen on a contract. That tiny sound has moved more borders, budgets, and beliefs than any battlefield trumpet. It is the sound of an agreement between a government and a company, stamped with urgency, bound with secrecy, and paid for by people who will never see the boardroom where it was signed. The secret behind the modern army is that it is woven together by private hands. The boots, the drones, the fuel lines, the satellite links, the meals on bases, the software in command centres, the spare parts that keep engines humming, and the consultants who translate chaos into invoices. Every step from training to deployment has a vendor. And when every step has a vendor, conflict stops being a single event and becomes an ecosystem. An ecosystem does not end, it renews itself. Here is how the game works. A company promises to solve a threat with a new tool. The price climbs as features are added, timelines shift, and scope grows. If the tool is late, the crisis cannot wait, so a stopgap contract appears. If the tool works, it needs servicing, upgrades, and exclusive parts. If it does not work, it needs more funding to be fixed because the mission is too important to fail. Either way, the meter keeps running. And when the meter runs long enough, the tool becomes indispensable. Now, you cannot replace it without chaos, and so another contract appears to bridge the gap while a new solution is explored. The bridge becomes a highway. There is a chorus that sings behind every major deal. Lobbyists whisper about jobs in key districts, about factories that would go quiet, about layoffs that would make headlines. Analysts publish reports on rising dangers. Think tanks hold panels that feel like public service announcements but are paid for like marketing. Retired officials lend gravitas and tell you that this is the responsible choice, the safe choice, the patriotic choice. Everyone speaks the language of security because it is the only dialect that cannot be questioned without accusations. Doubt becomes dangerous. Skepticism becomes ungrateful. And the contract moves forward. Then comes the revolving door. A planner who once wrote requirements becomes an executive who now fulfills them. A procurement lead becomes a consultant who knows exactly how to win the next bid. A general who learned every weakness of the system becomes the spokesperson who promises to fix them with just a little more budget and a little more time. No one has to plan a conspiracy. Incentives are fluent enough. When a career path rewards the same conclusions, you do not need a script to get everyone on the same page. The bill is not only dollars and cents. The real bill is paid in choices that never appear on the table. What if peacekeeping tech and disaster relief tools got the same race to innovate as missiles? What if veteran care, mental health, or diplomacy software had maintenance contracts as ironclad as fighter jets? But those lines are thin, and their lobby is small, and their crises do not have daily graphics on the news. So the oxygen flows to the fire. That is the secret inside the secret. The market loves subscriptions. Bullets, fuel, cloud licenses, data analysis, satellite bandwidth, armoured repairs, training renewals, cybersecurity patches, unmanned pilot hours, war as a service. You do not buy a war. You subscribe to readiness, to deterrence, to influence. And the bill arrives like clockwork even when the guns are quiet, especially when the guns are quiet, because quiet is when fear can be sold by the forecast. People often ask, why do wars feel endless? Because the paperwork is designed to outlive the battles. Contracts are written for years. Supply chains are built to be too large to stop. Political talking points are printed to link a district's prosperity to a weapons line. 1,000 small dependencies grow around a single program. That network becomes a living thing that resists change. When someone suggests cutting back, the network screams in every language it knows: jobs, security, prestige, strategy. It is a perfect defense system, and it does not fire a single shot. And yet, there are moments when the mask slips. A single spare part priced like a luxury watch. A test that fails, then passes after the definition of success shifts. A delay that rolls into another delay while penalties are forgiven. Each one is explained away as a necessity of complexity, and there is truth in that. These systems are complex. But complexity is also a curtain that hides a simpler motive. Some people get rich when crises never end. This is not a story about villains hiding in shadows. It is a story about ordinary temptations dressed in uniforms and briefcases, about a machine that feeds itself by turning fear into forecasts and forecasts into funding. It is a story where peace is a rounding error and war is a business plan. So listen for the pen. When it clicks, ask who wrote the demand, who will deliver the supply, who will profit from the delay, and who will pay when the product does exactly what it was designed to do. Come back for more. War should not be a subscription, and security should not be a sales funnel. The contract secret is simple. If you pay forever, they will build forever. And if they build forever, someone somewhere will always find a reason to keep the engines warm. A quiet deal is being made about you right now, and the only person not at the table is you. Think about the last time you reached for your phone in the dark, just to check the weather or to silence an alert. That single tap set off a chain. A tiny piece of code reported your location, your device type, your language, the minute and second you were awake. Another snippet logged the page you came from, how long you stayed, and where you went next. Your morning coffee app took the baton, noting your usual order and the store you prefer, while your map accelerated the picture with a dot that moves where you move. None of it feels sinister. It feels like convenience, but stitched together, these moments form a living portrait of you. Here is the secret. Your portrait is for sale. It is boxed, labelled and priced like grain or oil, then traded by people you have never met. The currency is your clicks, your swipes, your glances, and your silence whenever a new permission prompt appears. The market is global. The buyers are hungry. This system hides in the ordinary. A loyalty card turns into a thread that ties your purchases to your identity. An email address becomes a key that unlocks every account it touches. An advertising identifier tucked into your phone operates like a name tag that you cannot see. Advertising exchanges run quiet auctions in the space between one page and the next, shipping slivers of your data to a chorus of bidders. The price of access to you is set in fractions of a second, again and again, thousands of times a day, while you scroll past a photo of your friend's cat. Companies will say the details are anonymous. They will say names are scrubbed and data is aggregated, but patterns are stubborn. A home address seen at night and a workplace seen in the day narrow the field. The same device that shops for baby clothes begins visiting pediatric clinics, and suddenly the picture is anything but anonymous. Put enough puzzle pieces on a table, and the image becomes obvious to anyone willing to look. What does this portrait tell? It hints at your habits, your health, your income, your worries, the songs you loop, the news that keeps you awake, the ads you skip, the ones you watch. It reveals relationships through shared locations and overlapping routines. It exposes your weaknesses, not to embarrass you, but to predict you. Prediction is the product. Once someone can forecast your next click or your next purchase, they can influence it. They can set a price just for you. Choose a message that will land just right, and keep trying until something does. This is not only about selling shoes or streaming subscriptions. Insurers care about risk. Lenders care about trust. Employers care about reliability. Political campaigns care about fear and hope and the thin edge between them. Imagine being nudged toward a decision that feels like your own, when in reality it was shaped by a profile you never saw. That is the quiet power of the trade. You do not remember agreeing to this, and that is the point. Consent has been turned into a maze. You are shown a burst of friendly screens, bright buttons that say, accept, tiny links that say, learn more, and pages upon pages of text written to be endured, not understood. You pick the simple path because you want to use the service you came for. Meanwhile, the data economy leans on that moment of fatigue to claim your blessing and harvest your life. A day passes. Your sleep app hears your restlessness. Your calendar exposes your lunch across town. Your ride share confirms the route. Your payment verifies the place and time. Your fitness tracker maps your heart rate against the hills you climb. At home, the smart television listens for commands, while your streaming history whispers what makes you laugh and what makes you cry. Even when you are still, the portrait grows. This is not inevitable. It is chosen, engineered and maintained. It is profitable because you are profitable. The secret is not that data has value. It is that your data is treated as if it belongs to everyone but you. To keep it flowing, the industry relies on unfamiliar language, invisible settings, and endless trade partners. The complexity is not accidental. It is a moat. There is another path, and it begins with attention. You can refuse unnecessary permissions. You can silence location tracking for apps that do not need to know where you sleep. You can reset your advertising identifier and turn off personalized ads, slowing the trail back to you. You can use a browser that blocks routine trackers and a search engine that refuses to follow you. You can swap your main email for an alias and break the link between accounts. You can clear old apps, old logins, and old promises you never meant to make. You can ask companies what they have on you and request that it be deleted, a right that exists in many places, even if it is not obvious. No single step seals the door, because this is not a single door. It is a house with many rooms, some with windows you cannot see. But every step dims the light that shines on your portrait. Every setting you change is a vote for a future where privacy does not have to be a luxury. Share less. Slow the stream. Make them work for it. There is power, too, in speaking about it. Tell the people around you that their data has a life beyond their screen. Ask companies how they use what they collect. Reward the ones that speak clearly and act with restraint, and walk away from those that do not. Your choices nudge the market. Enough nudges become a push. The data harvesting secret is not a twist reveal waiting at the end of a story. It is the air we are breathing online. The sooner we recognize it, the sooner we can insist on a different arrangement. You are not a crate of information stacked on a warehouse floor. You are not an inventory line or a bid request. You are a person with a life that should not be traded. The market may not care, but you can, and that can be enough to begin. A smiling volunteer at your door, a clipboard in one hand and a cause on their shirt. You open your wallet because that's who you are. And somewhere far from your front steps, a polished boardroom nods. Mission accomplished. Here's the part that stings. Some organizations are engineered less to help people and more to help money change costumes. They take a pure impulse, generosity, and reroute it through a maze of fees, insider deals, and tax angles until only crumbs reach the people you thought you were feeding. Not every non-profit, not even most, but enough to warp the system and keep the illusion alive. Imagine a disaster on the news. You feel that tug in your chest. A telemarketer calls within days. Every dollar helps. You give. Later, you learn the fundraising company kept more than half. The charity paid management to a firm owned by the founder's cousin, and the rest went to glossy mailers asking for more. Programs? A sliver. The kind that looks good on a brochure but barely moves the needle in real life. Psychologically, urgency overrides scrutiny. We want to act, to feel useful, to push back against helplessness. So we rush the gift, and they rush the story. Clean logos, phrases like trusted partner, impact, and on the ground. But watch the money trail. If donations detour through shell vendors, if the salaries read like winnings, if awareness campaigns consume more than actual aid, that's not charity, that's theatre. The trick is simple. They borrow our language and wear it like armour. Where we hear care, they see cover. A foundation that gives almost entirely to another entity they also control. A donor-advised fund that pools money with a promise to give someday, while fees quietly clip coupons every month. A feel-good photo op that masks a year of burn rate spent on consultants who are, by coincidence, the board's closest friends. There's a deeper reframe here. Giving isn't just about the heart. It's also about the path your gift takes after it leaves your hand. Not just intention, but structure. Not only kindness, but clarity. When we learn to pair compassion with verification, we don't become cynical. We become precise. We stop paying for the costume and start funding the work. So, what does precision look like? It sounds like calm questions asked before money moves. What percentage actually reaches programs, not awareness, not education, not admin renamed as impact? Who sits on the board, and are they independent from the vendors? Is there an audited financial statement you can read without a decoder ring? Are results measured in human outcomes, not only in dollars raised? It also looks like patience. Scammers feast on the first wave after a tragedy. Waiting a week often reveals who is present when cameras fade, who partners locally, who reports back with specifics rather than slogans. And it looks like choosing smaller, boringly effective groups over shiny mega brands when the evidence supports it. Local shelters, mutual aid networks that publish line-by-line spending, organizations that show you the cost per meal, per bed, per caseworker hour, and then show you the lives changed, not just the metrics met. Ask for the tax filing. Ask for the program breakdown. Ask where the last big check went. If the answers pinball you between buzzwords, step back. Here's a simple street test. If a charity story is all about the founders, the gala, the celebrity face, you are the customer and your attention is the product. If the story is about the people served, their choices, their dignity, and you almost forget the charity's name by the end, you've probably found the work. And once you find it, fund it like you mean it, monthly, modestly, steadily, because consistent support beats one dramatic burst almost every time. The fake charity secret isn't that people are bad. It's that systems tilt toward what is rewarded. If Flash raises money, Flash multiplies. If we reward transparency, humility, and outcomes, those will spread instead. We do not need to harden our hearts. Keep the softness. Keep the impulse to help. Just route it through questions that clear the fog. That's how we move our generosity from a moment to a force, from a feeling to a structure that can't be easily gamed. Because the most powerful gift is not only the money you give, it's the message you send about how giving should work. Your phone is asleep beside you, but it whispers more at night than you say all week. A quiet glow from a streetlight spills across the room, and you would never guess how many eyes live inside that light, how many ears live in the towers you pass, how many places your shadow shows up long after you have moved on. The secret is not the camera you can see. The secret is the web you cannot. Think of an ordinary day. You unlock your door, and a little chip hums a time, a place, a pattern. You start the car, and your route becomes a habit in a database. You pass a single intersection, and a plate reader blinks. You tap a transit card. You text a friend. You buy a coffee. None of those moments feel dramatic. They feel small, harmless, forgettable, but they do not forget you. Here is the uncomfortable part. Governments do not need to confess how much they know, because it is not always collected by them. It is purchased. It is shared. It is requested with friendly language and a quiet order behind it. Ad companies build the map. Third parties sell the legend. Agencies borrow the compass. Not just about the camera, but the quiet databases behind it. And the easiest way to find someone is never to kick in a door. It is to follow the trail we volunteer every time we choose convenience. A smartphone setting that stays on because turning it off is one more tap. A loyalty card that saves a little money and spends a little privacy. A doorbell that watches for packages and learns the faces on your street. A car that knows when you brake, where you park, how you drive. When 1,000 tiny choices line up in a row, they stop feeling like choices at all. They feel like the weather. They feel inevitable. Here is a simple path through a complicated topic. Begin with a moment you recognize. Name the idea. Tell a short story. Explain why it works. And leave with the one thing worth remembering. So let's tell a short story. A neighbour's bike goes missing. They scroll cameras and doorbells up and down the block. An app pings a cluster of motion at 2 in the morning. A car's location log fills in a gap. A phone's backup quietly answers a question no one wanted to ask out loud. Before sunrise, the bike is back. Everyone cheers the happy ending. No one asks how easily that same net could catch the wrong person on the wrong night for the wrong reason. Psychologically, we are wired to trade distant risks for immediate ease. A free app now, a hard-to-imagine harm later. We feel seen when an algorithm remembers our order, and we do not feel watched when it remembers our route. That is the trick. Not fear, but comfort. Not force, but habit. Not a single giant eye, but a million polite glances that add up to a full picture. By the time we notice the picture, it already looks like us. This is not about hiding. It is about choosing what you share on purpose. It is about control. You can lower the volume of your signal without leaving the modern world. You can change permission prompts from always to only when in use. You can turn off what does not need to be on, and you can say no without being extreme. You can ask the devices in your life a simple question. What do you take? Where does it go? Who can touch it? And how do I take it back? You can read the quiet parts of the terms you click, the ones that say may, might, and could, because that is where the real story is told. And it helps to remember this. Silence is not safety. Silence is just unawareness. Awareness is the first lever. When you can see the system, you can decide where you stand in it. You do not have to be perfect. You do not have to vanish. You only have to make one small, deliberate choice at a time until the shape of your day belongs to you again. The hidden surveillance secret is not some cloak and dagger mystery. It is how ordinary your data looks on the way in and how extraordinary it becomes when it is stitched together. The secret is that you are the author of more of that story than you were told. And once you start writing it with intention, a little at a time, the balance shifts. Quietly. Back toward you. The truth did not shrink. Someone just tilted the frame. You're looking at the same events as everyone else, but the picture is slanted. The colours are turned up in odd places, and the shadows are stretched to hide what someone prefers you do not see. That is not an accident. It is a choice made long before a headline hits your eyes. Here is the quiet reality. Every newsroom has a landlord. Owners do not have to write the copy to shape the story. They buy the presses and the pipelines, and with that, they set the pressure. Sometimes it is a memo. More often, it is a meeting about budgets, a reminder about ad revenue, a smile that says certain guests will always get a seat and certain questions should always be asked last. Tilt the camera just a little, and you never need to say the word bias. The angle does the talking. Notice how the tilt shows up. A scandal might be placed on the home page for a quick burst of outrage, then quietly buried under softer features when the wrong donor's name appears. A tough investigative piece can be delayed with the elegant phrase due diligence, while a flattering profile glides through with barely a comma moved. The verbs in a headline do heavy lifting. Allies float and evolve. Opponents scheme and flip. The same facts, two different frames, and you are nudged to feel one story is noble while the other is suspect. You can hear it in who gets quoted. You will meet experts who always seem to agree with the owner's broader interests. The dissenters, when they appear at all, are framed as controversial or fringe. You can see it in what is not asked. A reporter might push on the drama and avoid the money trail. That is a tell. Follow the money, and you will find what the story was afraid to touch. This is not only about politics. When a parent company has stakes in entertainment, corruption looks like gossip. When it has stakes in technology, antitrust looks like innovation. When it has stakes in energy, emissions look like progress. And when the owner is seeking regulatory favour, you will watch tough language melt into sober caution and then into silence. Bias is not just what is said, it is the editorial oxygen that gets turned up for one narrative and down for another. Add the machinery of the modern attention economy. The metrics do not reward reflection. They reward sparks. Owners know it. Outrage keeps you from leaving. If they can keep you angry at the characters they have chosen, they can sell your attention to sponsors and keep friendly relationships with the powerful. And when those relationships are with the same hands that write the laws, you are not just watching the news, you are watching an alignment of interests perform as information. So how do you level the frame? Start by asking what is missing. If a story quotes officials and industry spokespeople, where are the workers, the local residents, the independent analysts? If a headline sings, read the body with a pencil in your mind and ask, what did they not measure? What did they not compare? Pay attention to placement. A scandal pushed late at night is still a scandal. A correction tucked beneath a lifestyle piece is still a confession. Rotate your sources. If one outlet frames a protest as chaos, find coverage that follows the organisers and reads the permit applications. If one outlet treats a market crash like a thunderclap, look for a reporter who tracks the credit conditions and the footnotes. Do not mistake balance for truth. If reality is a weighted scale, pretending both sides weigh the same is another form of tilt. Seek the thing beneath the argument. Documents, data, budgets, body cam footage, contracts. Original material is stubborn. It resists spin when you read it yourself. Follow ownership and sponsorship disclosures. They will not tell you everything, but they whisper where the wind blows. Notice the pundit, who never seems to disclose the consultancy they run or the board they sit on. Notice which stories cause a flurry of ads to appear and which stories seem to run on fumes. The financial weather is a strong predictor of editorial climate. And then slow down. Speed is the accomplice of manipulation. If someone needs you enraged right now, ask who benefits if you share without thinking. The quickest share is often the most profitable share for someone who is not you. The secret is not that bias exists. The secret is how beautifully it hides in decisions that look routine, reasonable, even professional. A quiet phone call that suggests a small change. A morning meeting that sets a tone. A style guide that tucks doubt into a sentence like a seed. None of it needs to be a conspiracy when the incentives are aligned from the boardroom to the byline. You cannot control who owns the cameras, but you can control whether the angle owns you. Build a habit of checking the frame, asking who paid for the lens, and stepping back far enough to see the edges. If enough people do that, the secret loses its power. Not because the owners change, but because the audience does. When you stop letting someone tilt your horizon, you start to see straight. And once you see straight, it is very hard for anyone to sell you a crooked world. There is a door you never see until you're invited. Not the grand entrance with cameras and flags, but the side door with soft light and first names. Past that door, the air is quieter, the coffee is hotter, and the answers come a little faster. That is the political donation secret. Money doesn't always buy a law. It buys a chair. It buys a calendar slot. It buys the patience to listen all the way to the end of a sentence. Here's what it looks like in real life. A crowded fundraiser, laughter on top of clinking glass. A staffer scans the room and nods. A donor arrives and the vibe shifts half a degree. On cue, a hand on a shoulder, a quick lean in, and a private corridor appears as if by magic. They talk policy like it's personal. They trade stories, not just statistics. Meanwhile, outside, a nurse on a break leaves her third voicemail for the same office, hoping for a callback before her next 12-hour shift. One voice gets a hallway, the other gets a voicemail box. The secret is not always a backroom deal. It is an invisible priority system. Politicians are human. Human attention is scarce. The people who make themselves costly to ignore end up first in line. Psychologically, this works because access taps into reciprocity. When someone gives you something valuable, even as simple as reliable support or a bundled check, your mind leans toward giving something back, even if it's just your full attention and a little extra effort. That is not always corruption. It is psychology wearing a suit, so the agenda gets shaped before the votes are cast. Not by the letter of a bill, but by the order of the meetings. Who gets morning coffee and who gets the last slot on a Friday? Who gets a text on a policy draft and who reads about it after it's already framed? When you steer the first conversation, you set the map, and maps decide where the road goes. Sometimes the secret is dressed up as community care, a gala with scholarships and speeches about opportunity. Good things happen there, but access is the exchange rate beneath the decor. The donors who show up again and again become familiar, and familiarity becomes trust, and trust becomes a reflex. If you have ever noticed how a familiar face calms a busy mind, you already understand the leverage at work. But there's another side to this. Influence is not only for the wealthy, it's for the organized. One person with a small check is a whisper. 10,000 people with small checks are a chorus that can't be waved past. In recent years, you have seen campaigns where small donors didn't just show up. They changed what was possible to say out loud. The lever isn't always the size of a single gift. It is the weight of collective attention. And attention is a gift you can give without asking permission. You can volunteer an afternoon, or learn a name and use it when you call, or show up consistently to public meetings, the slow, unglamorous ones, where policy bones get set before flesh is added. You can ask better questions, the kind that keep the discussion rooted in real life, like what a policy looks like at a kitchen table on the 2nd of the month. You can thank people who show courage and keep receipts on those who do not. Small acts stack. They create their own kind of access, rooted in presence rather than price. When you name what is happening and why it works, people listen longer and think harder, because understanding the reason makes the message stick. If you strip away the theatre, politics is a competition for limited attention. The donation secret bends that attention toward the people already closest to the side door. And yet, secrets lose power when you describe them plainly. The moment you see that access is the currency, you can start paying in something different. You can trade consistency for shortcuts. You can trade truth for talking points. You can trade time for influence and then spend that influence widening the doorway. Maybe the most subversive thing you can do is insist that the front door be the only door, that everyone stands in the same line, and the measure of a good idea is how many lives it improves, not how many galas it attends. It will not change overnight. But every time a calendar makes room for an ordinary voice, the map redraws itself. Every time a staffer says, "Let's hear the nurse too," the hallway shrinks and the public square grows. That is the political donation secret. Not a conspiracy, a pattern, not a villain, a system, Name it, and it starts to loosen. Keep naming it, and one day the quiet door won't be needed, because the room will finally belong to everyone. Imagine a race where every runner quietly agrees to jog, and the ticket price to watch the sprint never drops. That is the price-fixing secret. It looks like competition, with logos and ads and shiny discounts, but behind the curtain, the outcome is already settled, and you are paying for a finish line no one tries to cross. Here is how it works. In a healthy market, companies hustle. They shave margins, invent better products, outdo each other to win your choice. Price fixing flips that script. Rivals whisper instead of sprint. They meet after conferences, on golf courses, in back rooms, in group chats that disappear by morning. A handshake here, a coded phrase there. No contracts, just a shared understanding. No one starts a price war. Keep the numbers high, move together, smile for the cameras and pretend it is just coincidence. You can feel it when every gas station on the block changes by the same amount on the same day, when every airline wants a bafflingly similar fare for the same route, when brand after brand suddenly charges the same for less inside the box. Sometimes there is an actual cartel, bold and brazen. Sometimes it is softer and smugger, like a wink across the table at a fancy dinner or a signal sent through a press release about maintaining industry discipline. And sometimes it is not even people, but software. Algorithms watch each other the way birds watch the flock. One creeps the price up, the other follows. Both learn that keeping it high is safer than fighting. The code never breaks a sweat, and neither does the price. This secret survives because it hides in plain sight. Companies talk about stability and premium positioning. They say they are matching input costs or responding to market conditions. They keep it just vague enough that you doubt your instincts. After all, they still advertise sales. They still shout about quality, but compare the receipts month after month and the pattern tells on them. The so-called discount is staged, the coupon is a nudge, the baseline keeps climbing. The victims are not a footnote. It is the family standing in the grocery aisle, realizing the cheaper brand somehow costs the same as the fancy one. It is the small contractor losing bids because the big players rotated the win ahead of time. It is the patient who pays more for a pill, not because it is better, but because rivals agreed to stop undercutting. Every extra dollar siphoned from your wallet goes somewhere, to a safer balance sheet, a larger bonus, a quieter life for executives who fear a price war more than they fear regulators. And yes, there are laws, loud ones, but this secret is slippery. It morphs into polite trade association talk, into public remarks about capacity discipline, into price leadership, where one company nudges and the rest fall in line. The line between lawful imitation and illegal collusion is thin enough to walk in a suit and tie. Whistleblowers sometimes break the spell. A stray email leaks. A leniency program tempts the first defector. A raid finds the notes from that hotel meeting. For a moment, the curtain lifts, fines are paid, heads nod solemnly, and everyone swears to compete harder starting now. Then the theatre resets, the algorithms hum, and the audience forgets why the race felt slow. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Price fixing persists because it is profitable and because it feels safe. Competing is risky. Colluding is quiet. In stable, mature markets with a handful of giants, the temptation to drift toward alignment is constant. Add the power of shared consultants, shared investors, and software that predicts your next move better than you can, and the secret becomes a habit. But secrets fray when people pay attention. You notice when phrases repeat across different companies as if written by the same hand. You notice when a supposed shortage just happens to arrive after executives speak about discipline on an earnings call. You notice when a price drops only after a new outsider enters with nerves of steel and nothing to lose. Markets are stories told in numbers, and when every chapter sounds the same, you are not reading competition. You are reading choreography. So the next time you wonder why every option costs the same, picture that quiet agreement not to sprint. Picture the runners who could be dazzling you, choosing instead to jog in sync while you pay for the thrill. That is the price. Fixing secret. The race is real. The uniforms are different. The track is lit. The crowd is cheering. And still, somehow, no one is running as fast as they can. The finish line has been moved just out of reach. Not by chance, not by fate, but by a pact that survives best when you stop looking straight at it. A closed door can be louder than a megaphone. You do not hear what is said, but you can feel the decision being made without you. And here is the part that stings most. Often, it is not a conspiracy with capes and candles. It is a calendar invite with 2 names and an inside joke. The secret society secret is less mysterious than it sounds. People who see each other often, who trade small favors and share quiet moments, move information faster than people who meet in public and wait their turn. That is the engine. Familiar faces, private spaces, and a steady rhythm of you help me, I help you. Psychologically, this works because reciprocity and familiarity lower risk. We trust those we know, and we repay those who show up for us, even when we never signed a contract to do it. Picture how it plays out. A promotion opens. Officially, there will be interviews. Unofficially, someone hears, "We already have a strong internal candidate," whispered over coffee. A grant committee meets next week. Officially, proposals are scored. Unofficially, a golfer says, "I played with her last month. She's solid." And the tide shifts with a nod. None of this looks dramatic. It looks like trust being recycled in circles tight enough to keep the gains inside. You can hear it in the dialogue. "We figured it out over breakfast." "Oh, we already talked about that at the club." "Don't worry, I'll float your name." Those lines are the handshake you never got. And they work because small groups create certainty. Less friction, fewer surprises, faster yes. Psychologically, social proof rides along. If the room already trusts you, the risk feels smaller, even when no evidence has changed. So here is the reframe. The secret is not the ritual. It is the relationship. That means you are not entirely powerless. You can build circles of your own, and you can do it in daylight. The pattern is simple, even if it is not easy. Make time for small rooms. Host the breakfast. Invite the 2 people who never meet and say, you 2 should know each other. Ask for clear, ethical favors and return them quickly. Close triangles. When you benefit from someone's help, introduce them to someone they can help in turn. Structurally, thinking in terms of hook, idea, example, and insight helps you make sense of the pattern and explain it clearly to others, so they can join you in building healthier networks on purpose. Let's ground it. Imagine you want to move a community project forward, but every door feels bolted. Try this. Pick 3 people with adjacent interests and host a short, focused meetup with a single concrete ask. Could we share venues for the next quarter? Do not push for everything. Ask for one small, reversible step. Then follow up the next day with gratitude and a recap, and a week later with a result. Psychologically, this taps reciprocity and consistency. When people make a small public commitment, they are far more likely to continue, especially if they are thanked and see momentum quickly. Over time, you become the person who gets things unstuck, and people start whispering your name at breakfast too. Yes, there are clubs that hoard access and tilt the table, but not every quiet room is corrupt. The difference is whether the door is a gate or a hinge. Gates keep others out. Hinges open both ways. If your circle shares information broadly, invites new voices in, and writes decisions down in the sunlight, you are not playing their game. You are upgrading it. And the more of us who do that, the more expensive secrecy becomes. Here is the quiet takeaway. Power moves through relationships like current through wire. You cannot see it, but you can feel the light turn on. So choose the wiring. Build circles that repay in public. Make trust travel. And when a door closes, remember, the loudest thing about a closed door is how many hands it took to shut it. Put your hands to work, opening the next one. The slowest weapon in the world is a form with an empty box. It does not explode. It does not shout. It just sits there, waiting for you to fill it out again and again, while the clock quietly eats your momentum. That is the red tape secret. When power wants to stop you without leaving fingerprints, it does not send a guard. It sends a process. You can feel it in the way a voice says, "Please hold." In the polite email that says, "Your request has been received." In the meeting that is scheduled for later, when later is all it takes to make your cause smaller. Bureaucracy, when used as a weapon, does not need a villain in a dark room. It needs a calendar, a checklist, and people who follow rules so closely that truth starves in the waiting room. This is not about paperwork for safety or fairness. There are forms that protect us and standards that matter. The trick happens when process stops serving purpose and begins serving delay. The goalposts move, the checklist grows. The tiny box you forgot to tick becomes the reason your hearing is pushed to next season. And next season becomes next year, and your energy turns heavy. Notice how the tactic works. Instead of saying no, they say not yet. Instead of saying stop, they say submit. They ask for one more study, then a scoping of that study, then a comment period that closes when you are least ready. They ask for evidence, then dismiss it as incomplete because a date is missing on page 3. They rewrite the requirements while you are meeting the old ones. They add a signature line you have never seen before, signed by a person who is on leave until further notice. It is everywhere power gathers. In a permit office that holds your rally request just long enough for your chosen date to pass. In a so-called independent review that takes so long your story falls out of the news cycle. In an ethics hotline that logs your complaint and routes it through committees until your courage feels wasted. In boards, banks, and agencies where every decision has a draft, a revision, and a delay that is the decision. The genius of it is plausible deniability. No one says they are silencing you. They are simply following procedure. They are making sure the I is dotted and the T is crossed. And if your budget runs out while they are dotting and crossing, well, that is unfortunate, but rules are rules. It is a velvet grip that leaves no bruise. You leave on your own, exhausted. So what do you do when the hand that holds you back looks like a form? You make the delay visible. You write down every date, every promise, every name, and you say them out loud where others can hear. Do not argue against the existence of rules. Demand the rule, the section, the source in writing. Ask what standard must be met, and by whom, and by when, and refuse to move until those words are clear. If they tell you to wait, ask them to define the timeline and what happens if it is missed. Make the timeline a shared stage, not a trap. Build redundancy into your path. While one request is pending, prepare the next route. If one door is stuck, knock on the one beside it and the one beyond that. Convene allies who can copy you on emails and sit with you in rooms where the clock is the only weapon. The presence of witnesses changes the pace. Simplicity is a blade in a maze. Keep your ask crisp, human, undeniable. A system designed to drown you in details has nothing to grab when your words are clean and clear. Bring sunlight. If a record is public, request it and publish the weight itself. If a meeting is required, invite people who do not scare when the agenda drifts. If they speak in jargon, ask for the translation in plain language and repeat it back so it lives on the record. Do not let their vocabulary become your silence. Most of all, protect your energy. They want your patience to fray, your hope to thin, your schedule to break. Set your own dates and keep them, even if theirs slip. Tell your story in motion. Create milestones you control, so progress does not depend on a stamp you cannot reach. The trap works only when you stand still in it. The red tape secret is simple and cruel. Time wears louder than truth when truth is made to wait, but a clock can be turned into a bell. Ring it. Count the days out loud. Make the gap between what they promised and what they delivered the very ground you stand on. They will say they are only doing their jobs. Do yours with eyes open, pen steady, voice strong. In a world of endless forms, the most dangerous box is the one where you stop. Fill in every line you must and then draw your own and walk across. They don't pull the plug. They dim the room until you forget there were windows. That's the hidden censorship secret. It rarely looks like a bold red stamp or a dramatic takedown. Most of the time, it happens upstream, quietly, while everything still feels normal. By the time you notice something missing, the decision was made miles earlier, in rooms you will never see, by systems you didn't know were involved. Start at the beginning, where an idea is born. Before anyone writes a word or hits record, a tiny calculation kicks in. Will this get flagged, demonetized, downranked, or invite a legal headache? People learn the boundaries by bruising into them. After a few painful strikes, they begin to steer around sensitive topics without even realizing it. That is censorship's favorite move, getting you to edit yourself. No warning label, no siren. Just a quiet little nudge to play it safe. Move one step downstream, to editors and gatekeepers. They do not always say no, they ask for a tweak, a softer headline. Fewer names, less context here, an extra paragraph there, until the sting fades and the remaining piece feels reasonable, respectable, and emptier than the truth. No one deleted the facts. They were massaged into something that will not upset a sponsor, an advertiser, a partner, or a platform. Brand safety becomes a net with holes shaped like certain subjects. Now the legal layer, not the courtroom, the threat of it. Vague rules and complicated policies create a fog that favors silence. When rules are unclear, the safest choice is to cut the risky parts. A single stern letter can remove a sentence faster than 1,000 arguments. Strategic lawsuits are not always about winning. They are about chilling. You do not have to gag someone if you can convince them to put a hand over their own mouth. Then come the platforms. You picture a red button that says remove. The smarter button is called friction. Add a notice here, turn off recommendations there, require a few extra clicks. Label it as borderline. Say It is not suitable for advertisers. Bury it under 10 layers of search. The post is technically still there, but if an idea falls in a forest of down ranking and no one hears it, does it make a sound? Go deeper into the pipes. Hosting, payment processors, app stores, search engines, email services. Censorship can live in those pipes. You do not need to ban a voice if you can cut off its payments, throttle its newsletter, or refuse a software update. No public spectacle, no viral outrage, just a quiet policy email that says, after further review, we cannot support this content. The message never reaches you, so you never notice its absence. Even noise can be a form of silence. Flood a topic with junk, bots, and copy-paste talking points until the signal dissolves. Drown the hard questions in a sea of distractions. When everything looks chaotic, the mind grabs the nearest simple answer. Manufactured confusion becomes a filter that separates you from the uncomfortable truth you would have sought if you were not exhausted. Recommendations play their part. You think you are choosing freely, but the menu itself has been curated. The algorithm smiles and says, you might also like this, and it is safer, softer, easier. Over time, your feed becomes a velvet hallway with no doors that lead outside. It is not that the other rooms do not exist. It is that the hallway rarely turns toward them. How do you notice what is missing? Listen for weird quiet. When a massive story should be everywhere, and yet you hear nothing but synchronized small talk, that is a sign. Watch for identical phrases popping up across different outlets at the same time, like a chorus rehearsed in another room. Notice when search results feel unusually tidy, when the same 2 or 3 sources dominate, when older versions of pages are scrubbed of paragraphs you remember reading. Pay attention to the moment when sharing something suddenly feels like extra work, extra clicks, extra friction. Those are fingerprints. This does not mean every rule is bad or every moderation call is corrupt. Safety matters. Harm is real. The problem is secrecy and the quiet leverage baked into the system. When rules are vague, processes hidden, and appeals labyrinthine, power migrates to places without sunlight. That is where incentive, fear, and convenience make the decisions for you. So what can you do? Build a wider map. Follow people across different platforms, so a single gate cannot close your world. Save primary sources and archive pages, so edits do not erase the trail. Read the footnotes, then find the original documents the footnotes came from. Compare headlines across regions and languages. Translation is a lantern. Learn the difference between something being removed and something being demoted. Notice the nudges, the labels, the tiny pauses the system inserts before you can see or share. Support transparency like your attention depends on it, because it does. Ask for clear rules, clear explanations and meaningful appeals. Reward outlets that show their work. Value creators who disclose their corrections and keep their receipts. The more sunlight you bring to the pipeline, the harder it becomes to change the water without anyone tasting the difference. The hidden censorship secret is not a switch that turns speech off. It is a thermostat that sets the climate of what is sayable, thinkable, and findable. It adjusts expectations. It trains you to shrug and scroll, but you can adjust it back. Keep your curiosity loud, your sources diverse, and your patience long. When you feel the room dimming, do not accept the darkness as natural. Look for the windows, then open them. Fresh paint, a rented logo, a name that sounds like it sells office chairs. That's all it takes to hide a very old trick. The real decision maker stepping behind a cardboard storefront and letting the sign do the talking. A front company is a costume. Not necessarily illegal on its own, but perfectly tailored to blur who is holding the strings. It can own a building without the owner's name on the deed. It can pay a consultant without showing who wanted that consultant hired. It can move money like a whisper moves through a crowded room, heard, influential, and somehow belonging to no one in particular. Here's what it looks like in real life. You pass a quiet suite with frosted glass that reads Northfield Holdings or Silver Birch Ventures or some other neutral phrase. Inside, there's a desk, a plant that looks too plastic, and a stack of forms you are not meant to read. The person who greets you is polite and knows very little, because knowing very little is the point. The lease is in one company's name, the bank account in another, the invoice is routed through a third. To anyone who looks, it appears boring and legitimate, which is exactly why it works. Psychologically, this taps into our bias for what's visible. We trust what we can see. And a tidy logo beats a messy reality in the split second when our brain is deciding whether something feels credible. Add a receptionist, a website with stock photos, a few boilerplate certificates, and the mind relaxes. It stops asking who benefits, who decides, who takes the risk, and who gets the reward. That is the silent mathematics of control. And a front company is built to make those questions feel impolite to ask. So how does the disguise hold up when money starts to move? It stays clean by pushing signatures down the chain. The front pays a vendor, the vendor pays a fixer, the fixer pays the person who was meant to be paid from the beginning. The original decision maker never appears on the paper that matters. If trouble comes, the chain snaps at the weakest link, never at the hand that set it in motion. On the surface, the story still reads like a normal Tuesday of invoices and contracts. There are other disguises, loans that are never meant to be repaid, fees that are really favours, charitable gifts that circle back as influence, and foundations that exist to say, this is about helping people, not about power. Layers of entities can act like nested dolls, each one technically separate, each one carrying the face of innocence while the innermost figure smirks. The whole design leverages our craving for simple explanations. When things get too complex, most people stop asking. Complexity is part of the camouflage. If you want to sense who actually holds the reins, you do not need a law degree or a private investigator's badge. Start with 3 plain questions. Who can make a phone call and change where the money goes tomorrow? Who remains insulated when something goes wrong? And who, after the dust settles, still has the asset, the favour, or the leverage? The name on the door might not appear in any of those answers. The person who matters is the one no invoice needs to reference. It is tempting to treat this like a story about villains, but the deeper truth is about systems and incentives. When the reward for opacity is protection, people learn to love fog. When appearances buy trust, people invest in appearances. When we mistake neatness for honesty, we become the perfect audience for well-produced misdirection. The front company secret thrives on that gap between what we notice and what we assume. So remember the rule that cuts through the curtain. Power is not who shows up in the photo. Power is who can decide the angle of the camera. Influence is not who signs the check. Influence is who can redirect the payment without touching it. If you train yourself to follow outcomes instead of logos, patterns instead of promises, you start to see the outline of the person behind the cardboard desk and the plastic plant. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The front company is only as strong as our willingness to accept the costume at face value. Pay attention to the hand that moves the glove, and the costume stops being magic. That is the front company secret. The quietest way to steal a voice is with a pen, not a mask. Not a ski mask under a streetlight, but a fountain pen under fluorescent bulbs in a committee room, writing rules that look harmless until you try to use your ballot. Here's the trick. If you want fewer people to vote, you do not need to say it out loud. You just write rules that sound noble. You call them integrity. You call them security. You say the words fraud and confidence and order, and then you place tiny tripwires along the path to the polling place. Start with identification. Everyone should prove who they are. That sounds fair. But the rule book can bless one kind of ID and ignore another. A handgun license might open the door, a student ID might not. A tribal card might be questioned. A yacht club card might sail through. The difference is not an accident. It is a design choice hiding in plain sight. Then there is the calendar. You shorten early voting. You shave off a weekend. Maybe the Sunday when church vans take elders to the polls. You move a deadline from midnight to dinner time. You narrow the window for mail ballots and then insist on a signature that matches a file captured years ago in a hurry at a counter. When the signatures do not match, you shrug and say, rules are rules. You can starve the line. You close polling places in neighbourhoods where the wait is already long. You send fewer machines to districts that are busier. You limit the number of drop boxes and then plant them far from buses. Every extra minute becomes a tax on time, a tax that falls heaviest on people who cannot take an afternoon off, or who live 2 buses and a long walk from the nearest ballot drop. You can play musical chairs with the rolls, call it list maintenance, a tidy phrase, and then purge people whose mail came back, or whose names look like someone else's. When they show up, they get a provisional ballot and a promise that someone will check it later. Later is a comfortable word. Later can be the graveyard of intention. You can police the address. Dorms and shelters become suspicious. People who moved within the same town become mysteriously ineligible until they find a utility bill that their landlord never puts in their name. Students ask if they belong where they sleep or where they were born, and the answer changes depending on who is advantaged by their confusion. You can harden the envelope. You require a witness. You require a notary. You require a second envelope inside the first envelope and a secrecy flap that must fold just so. And then you reject the ballot when the flap is off by a breath. The paper becomes a maze, and every turn feels like a test you did not know you were taking. You can criminalize help. You make it risky to hand water to people in a line that curls around the block. You scare volunteers who want to collect ballots from neighbours without cars. You turn civic kindness into something people fear to do because one misstep could be a fine, or worse. You can do all of that and still say with a straight face that anyone who truly cares will find a way. But democracy is not a triathlon. It is not supposed to be an endurance sport where only the most determined finish. A good system meets people where they live. A bad system makes the road rougher for the same people every time. And then comes the narrative. If fewer people cast ballots, the story becomes apathy. If the lines are too long, the story becomes confusion. If certain neighbourhoods lag behind, the story becomes personal responsibility. The rules write the story, then the story justifies the rules, and the circle closes like a lid. Listen closely to the language used to defend the lid. They will say, everyone plays by the same rules, as if the distance to the starting line is the same for all. They will say, there is no overt ban, only a request for order. They will say the law is neutral, without mentioning that neutral laws written for unequal landscapes produce unequal results. They will ask where the smoking gun is, and you will have to explain that the smoke was replaced with fog, and the gun is now a fountain pen. The real secret is not that suppression still exists. The real secret is how ordinary it looks. It looks like an outdated database. It looks like a printer that ran out of paper. It looks like a polling place, moved at the last minute, and a text message that came too late. It looks like a long line outside a school gym and a short line in a building with a chandelier. It looks like a rule that assumes everyone has the time, the car, the day off, the perfect signature, the same kind of ID, the same trust in the process that has never asked them to gamble a day's wages on a civic errand. If you are wondering how to spot it, ask simple questions. Who benefits if this deadline is earlier? Who gets hurt if the polling places are fewer? Who finds it easier to vote if this ID counts and that one does not? If the answer keeps pointing in the same direction, the pattern is the point. This is not about one party's win or loss in 1 year. This is about the slow erosion of public power when paperwork grows teeth. A ballot is a voice, yes, but first, it is a path. When that path narrows, some people fall off the edge and are told they chose to stop walking. The antidote starts with refusing to accept the fog. Clear language, clear access, and clear accountability. Make the rules simple enough to say out loud and fair enough to survive that honesty. Count every vote cast in good faith. Build more doors than gates. And when someone insists the maze is necessary, ask them why the exits are always farther from the neighborhoods that have the most to say. The pen can lock, but the pen can also unlock. The real test is whether we are brave enough to read the fine print, to imagine who it excludes, and to demand rules that do not quietly decide who counts before the first ballot is even cast. The biggest secret in plain sight is not locked in a vault. It is read from a podium, draped in feel-good words, and sealed with a ribbon cutting. You hear the speech, jobs, growth, revitalization. You see the mayor smile, the executives nod, the confetti pop. What you do not see is the invoice with your name on it. Here is how the trick works. A giant company announces it is thinking about moving or expanding. Suddenly, city halls compete like contestants on a game show. The prize is a promise of jobs. The price is a package of support. That word sounds warm and harmless. In practice, it means free land, tax bills that disappear for years, new roads and pipes paid by you, and sometimes cash gifts wrapped in the language of innovation and development. The company does not call it a handout. It is an incentive, a partnership, a toolkit. The words change. The money flows the same way. There is a pattern to the pitch. Consultants arrive with glossy charts. They estimate a future full of sunshine. They count every possible ripple of spending, and they rarely include the shadows. Non-disclosure agreements keep details quiet until the deal is done. There may be promises of local hiring. There may be clawbacks if targets are missed. Those clauses look tough in a press release and turn soft in the real world. Years pass, the jobs trickle, and the bill for schools, buses, and fire stations still lands on your doorstep because the shiny newcomer is excused. This is not only a local game. At the national level, the code is written like a maze with secret doors. Companies call it relief and research support and accelerated depreciation. Accountants thread the needle. Profits move on paper. The tax burden shifts off the largest shoulders and onto everyone else. When risk shows up, losses are socialized. Bailouts are framed as stability and systemic protection. When winnings arrive, They are privatized and defended as the reward for bold vision. You can see it on stadium deals that promise magic crowds and year-round prosperity. You can see it when a factory gets a decade without property taxes, while the small bakery on the corner pays full freight and patches its own roof. You can see it when a certain e-commerce giant turns a headquarters search into a beauty pageant, making cities outbid one another with bigger and bigger baskets of support. The label never says subsidy. It says partnership and future and opportunity. The price tag is printed in smaller letters. Why does it continue? Because the language works. Because the process is complicated on purpose. Because no mayor wants to be the one who lost jobs. Because lobbyists write the drafts and then help interpret the fine print they wrote. Because press conferences are loud and budget shortfalls are quiet. And because the beneficiaries have the time and lawyers to shape the rules, while most people are working 2 jobs and trusting that the grown-ups in suits did the math. What does it cost? It costs the art teacher who lost her classroom because the district needed to tighten belts. It costs the bus route that stopped running after sundown. It costs the potholes that never get filled, the park lights that flicker out, the small businesses that never see a break, because their leverage is a handshake, not a team of consultants. It costs faith in a fair game. There are ways to change it, and none require cynicism. Ask for the price per job before the confetti. Demand plain numbers and public hearings. Require strong clawbacks that actually bite and automatic disclosures every year. Ban closed-door bidding wars and non-disclosure agreements in public deals. Make regions agree not to poach each other with your money. Put the same energy into helping the businesses already on your streets with permits, training, and access to capital. Support the watchdogs who read the documents when everyone else has moved on. The secret is not that corporations receive help. The secret is how help is framed, who pays, and who gets to decide. The next time you hear the word support, pause and translate. Support for whom? Relief from what? Partnership in which direction? Ask for terms, not adjectives. Ask for truth, not slogans, because every dollar has a job to do, and it should not be working against you while you clap at the ribbon line. Listen for the click that nobody hears. It's the sound of a door you were never meant to notice, swinging open as one career ends and another, far more profitable one quietly begins. On one side, a polished official swears to serve the public. On the other side, the same person holds the keys to boardrooms, lobby dinners, and private briefings where the public is only a distant rumour. Here is how it happens. A politician spends years learning the system, mastering the fine print that would put most people to sleep, collecting favours like tiny IOUs. They hold hearings, meet industry leaders, shape rules with language so careful that a single adjective can cushion $1 billion blow. They call it expertise. Industry calls it investment. And the day that politician leaves office, the phone starts ringing. Not from the voters who once stood in the rain to shake their hand, but from the very industries that studied their every move. There is a polite term for this, experience. There is a blunt term for this, leverage. The same relationships that shepherded bills through the maze now become the product being sold. These are not always obvious paychecks. Sometimes it is a seat on a corporate board for a few meetings each year, framed as wisdom, priced as influence. Sometimes it is a consulting role, a retainer, a speaking tour where the speech is just the cover for the conversations that happen afterward. Sometimes it is a think tank fellowship, with a title so grand you forget to ask who funds the building. You might hear about cooling off periods that forbid direct lobbying for 1 or 2 years. Listen closely to the loopholes humming beneath those words. A former official can be a strategist rather than a lobbyist. They can pick up the phone and advise. They can host a dinner where everyone knows what is being traded, because nothing needs to be said out loud. The revolving door does not need to spin fast. It only needs to keep turning steadily enough that the people inside never have to step into the weather outside. This is not confined to one country, one party, or one ideology. A former health minister becomes a pharmaceutical advisor. A finance regulator leaves and surfaces at a bank with a title that fits nicely on a brass plate. An energy official who once pledged to transition to cleaner power now consults for the very firms shaping how slow that transition must be. It is presented as continuity. It is sold as realism. It feels like gravity. Why do companies pay? Because access shortens time. A well-timed call can stall a reform. A carefully placed phrase can soften a rule. A warning whispered in the right ear can move a deadline from next year to never. And why do former officials go? Because the pay is better, the calendar is lighter, and the applause no longer depends on votes. They tell themselves that they are translating the public interest into practical action. In truth, they are translating public language into private advantage. The curious part is how invisible it all is. You rarely see a bag of cash on the table. You see mentorship, senior counsel, honorary chairs, special envoys, and advisory councils. You see white papers that quote the former official as a voice of reason. You see public hearings where no one lies, but no one says the thing that matters most. And when a new regulation appears, it looks neat and tidy, like it arrived fully formed. It did not. It arrived with fingerprints that fade when exposed to sunlight. Every so often a scandal breaks, and the door seems to jam. An investigation, a resignation, a pledge to tighten rules. You are told that the loopholes will be closed, the definitions sharpened, the recusal lists expanded. Then time passes. The door is oiled with good intentions, and very soon, click, the sound again. A quiet return to business as usual. There are ways to slow it down, real transparency that is not a maze of disclosures no one reads. Cooling off periods that measure years in practice, not in titles. Clear bans on ghost lobbying, dressed up as strategy, to pay and staff for public institutions that compete with private temptation, so that the most talented do not have to choose between serving people and serving profit. But even those require pressure, patience, and a public that remembers longer than a news cycle. So notice the patterns. When a leader starts to sound more like a spokesperson for the people they regulate than for the people who elected them, the door is already moving. When industry press releases and government statements echo each other with uncanny harmony, the hinges are warm. When a retired official is suddenly an expert on the needs of the very sector they once scrutinized, that expertise did not disappear and reappear. It never left the room. The great trick is convincing you that nothing can be done, that this is how grown-up policy works, that idealism is naive, and that everyone does it. The truth is simpler and harder. Power dislikes empty space, and money hates waiting in line. The revolving door is how both stay comfortable. The secret is not that it exists. The secret is how quietly it keeps turning while we look the other way and call it normal. Picture a stain that disappears the farther it spreads. That is how dirty cash survives. It does not sit in a duffel bag for long. It moves, and every move makes it look a little more ordinary, a little more like the money that pays the rent, funds a loan, or buys a sandwich on a busy weekday. Here is the simple truth most people miss. Illegal money is not trying to be invisible. It is trying to be boring. It learns the uniform. It memorizes the schedule. It files the paperwork. And by the time it arrives at the front desk of a bank or the counter of a small business, it is dressed like every other dollar in line. Think of a quiet corner cafe that takes in a lot of cash. On paper, the owner reports a strong weekend. The deposits go in small, regular amounts, never enough to trigger a shout, always enough to look healthy. Suppliers are paid with neat invoices. A few of those invoices are for goods that never arrived, but the paperwork says they did. A friend at a distribution company stamps a receipt. The cash becomes a payment. The payment becomes revenue. Then, a month later, a new company across the ocean sends a loan back, complete with interest, and that loan is repaid proudly from the cafe's account. Nothing flashy, just the rhythm of business. You can even picture the dialogue. "Busy week, right?" the teller asks. "Yeah," the owner smiles. "Sold out of croissants." The smile carries more weight than the numbers. The story makes sense. When the story makes sense, people relax. Underneath that calm surface, the money has gone through a few costume changes. It was placed somewhere it could be counted. It was layered through transfers, invoices, and fees, so the path blurred. It was integrated back into the system as a loan, a paycheck, a vendor payment, even a charitable donation. Not overnight, not in one dramatic leap. Inch by inch, it earned the right to be ignored. Psychologically, this works because people trust patterns that match their expectations, and institutions are built to reward documents that look tidy and consistent, not feelings that something is off. This is why the secret almost never lives in a shadowy back room. It lives in spreadsheets, in trade shipments priced just a bit too high or too low, in real estate that sits empty but appreciates on cue, in art whose value can float on taste and timing, in casinos where chips turn into receipts, in online platforms where small payments swirl like confetti until the trail goes grey. Each path uses something the legitimate world already needs: invoices, appraisals, transfers, credits, and the warm glow of a stamped approval. The power is not the trick. The power is the routine. Banks do not have superpowers. They have checklists. If a business looks stable, if deposits match a plausible story, if the documents line up, then systems nod along. The system is not looking for a perfect villain. It is looking for a perfect pattern. And clever operators build one. They pick cash-heavy businesses where totals are guesses, not counts. They run money through friendly companies that exist mostly on paper. They move funds across borders where definitions bend. Every hop adds a layer. Every layer buys time. There is another human angle we do not always admit. Most of us want the world to make sense. When someone presents a clean narrative, we fill in the blanks with trust. That is not a flaw. It is how groups function. But the same psychology that makes teams hum also lets false normalcy slide by. When X looks like Y long enough, it becomes Y to everyone who is not looking closely. That is the quiet engine of laundering. And that is why a solution depends on spotting the story, not just the math. The moment a pattern starts explaining itself too well, the moment a business looks busy on paper and empty in real life, the moment a loan arrives from nowhere and feels like a gift, that is the moment to ask better questions. The narrative should carry the numbers, not the other way around. So the lesson is not to distrust everything, it is to notice the choreography. Real sales leave footprints. Real suppliers have trucks, calls and complaints. Real growth produces mess, not just neat lines. When there is no mess, only polish, slow down. Legitimate money withstands curiosity. Dirty money hides in courtesy. The drug money secret is not magic. It is mimicry. It becomes respectable by borrowing the habits of respectability, letting banks and businesses wash it clean until it looks like it belonged there all along. The more we understand that, the harder it is for a stain to disappear just by spreading. Your opinion did not start in your head. It was planted with a smile, watered with headlines, and harvested with applause. Here is the secret. Propaganda almost never looks like propaganda. It dresses like public service. It speaks like a friend. It borrows the voice of experts and the comfort of official logos. It says, "Trust me," while quietly choosing the frame that makes questioning feel impolite. That is how governments shape the weather of thought. Not by blocking the sun, but by deciding when you see clouds. The trick begins with language. Change the words, and you change the world they point to. A war is a mission. A lie is a misstatement. A civilian death is collateral damage. Harsh surveillance becomes safety. The phrase is the pivot, and once the pivot is set, debate spins around it without touching the centre. If you accept the vocabulary, you inherit the conclusion. Then comes timing. A leak appears just when outrage needs a pressure valve. A report lands late on a quiet afternoon. A podium briefing floats a phrase, and by nightfall everyone repeats it as if it were born from their own thought. Repetition is not just noise, it is hypnosis. Say something often enough, and it becomes the furniture of the room. You stop noticing it. You start living around it. Credibility is outsourced. A government does not need to shout if a think tank will whisper. A memo morphs into a study. The study becomes a headline. The headline becomes your friend's post. And now the message arrives at your door, wearing the face of someone you already like. That is expert laundering. The source is 5 steps back, and the claim looks clean. Modern propaganda rarely forbids dissent. It floods it. If truth is a signal, confusion is weather. Release a handful of almost right facts, sprinkle in a few obvious errors, and let people argue about the small things until the big thing becomes boring. When nobody knows what to trust, people default to the loudest voice with the clearest story. Guess who has the clearest story ready? Fear paves the road, but belonging keeps you on it. Messaging leans on sacred words: security, freedom, family, dignity. It draws a circle around us and paints them as a blur. It asks you to prove your loyalty by not asking too many questions. It flatters your virtue while steering your attention. It offers certainty at a discount if you will only stop counting. Numbers can be choreographed. Announce the metric that flatters, bury the one that complicates, and compare apples to a carefully chosen orange. A trend line can be honest and still be misleading if the window is cropped. If the baseline moves, the story moves with it. The chart is a camera. The lens matters. The images matter even more. A single photo of an empty shelf can say crisis, even if most stores are fine. A carefully framed shot of a crowd can suggest universal support, even if the camera stands on tiptoe between 2 buses. A leader rolling up sleeves in a staged factory visit sends a feeling, and feelings do not ask for citations. The most powerful sentences in propaganda are not the big claims, but the small connectors. Everyone knows, as experts agree. Sources say, studies show. That soft scaffolding is where your guard drops. You fill in the gaps because your brain hates an unfinished pattern. The message is not trying to convince you it is right. It is trying to convince you it was already true. So what do you do when truth comes disguised as truth? Slow the moment. Ask the questions that make spin wobble. Who benefits if I believe this? What would prove the opposite? What words are doing the heavy lifting here? Can I find the first source, not the echo? Has the language changed in a way that makes the policy feel kinder than its outcomes? Would I still agree if the party colours were swapped? Check the verbs. Passive voice hides hands. Mistakes were made is a fog machine. If responsibility has no actor, you are being guided away from the scene of the action. Bring the actor back into the sentence and watch how the meaning changes. Look sideways. Compare how different places describe the same event. Notice which details survive the border and which dissolve. If a claim cannot live outside its native jargon, it is not a fact. It is a costume. Most of all, stay comfortable with uncertainty. Propaganda thrives in crowded emotions and empty patience. When you need an answer now, you will take the nearest one. When you can sit with not yet, you give yourself room to see the strings. The secret is not that governments lie. The secret is that the best propaganda tells partial truths while smuggling in the conclusion it needs you to hold. It asks you to outsource your curiosity. Do not. Keep it. Guard it. Use it. Because the moment you ask, wait, and look twice, the spell thins. And when enough people do that, even the most polished message meets its oldest enemy. A mind that refuses to be rented. Hear that? It is the quietest sound in public life. Just a door clicking shut. On the other side of that door are smiles that do not touch the eyes, coffee that goes cold because no one came to drink it, and a decision that will ripple through your paycheck, your rent, your water, the price of a bus ticket, the safety of a medicine, the wages at the store down the street. No cameras, no minutes, no applause. Just a handful of people deciding for millions who will never know their names. Here is how the backroom works. Someone calls a meeting with a harmless subject line. It could be a briefing, a courtesy visit, an informal check-in. Calendars are scrubbed until they look like clean windows. The attendees are chosen for their reliability, which is another way of saying they already agree. The stakes sound technical, which is another way of saying the public will be told it is too complicated. A phrase is crafted that can survive a headline. The phrase is never the truth. The truth is inside the clause that says except, the footnote that says unless, the appendix that says in this case. Then comes the choreography. A memo is drafted by someone whose title hides their influence. A draft rule appears, with one line changed, that unlocks a door for one company and locks a gate for everyone else. A committee chair signals that the clock is short and the vote is soon. A lobbyist, who says they are not a lobbyist, schedules a dinner that is not a dinner, but somehow ends with a promise. A donor hosts a reception where the loudest sound is the whisper. We will remember this. The trick is not secrecy for secrecy's sake. The trick is plausible deniability. The trick is 3 steps between request and result, so no finger touches the switch, only the shadow of a finger. The trick is a think tank that publishes a paper that becomes a talking point, that becomes a panel on a show, that becomes common sense. The trick is an emergency that is never quite an emergency, but always just urgent enough to close the door again. You can feel it more than you can see it. When a bill moves too fast for anyone to read, that is a backroom's signature. When your representative suddenly speaks in phrases that sound like they were copy-pasted from an industry brochure, that is a backroom's accent. When an exemption is narrow enough to look harmless and wide enough to drive a convoy through, that is a backroom's geometry. You cannot crash these rooms, but you can learn their schedule. They prefer late hours, holiday weeks, and the grey zone between old news and new news. They love the phrase stakeholder and the word modernisation. They hide behind consultation while taking notes only from the people they invited. They tell you that the comment window is open while making sure it falls during a week when most people have their hands full with real life. They do not fear outrage. They fear a calm, specific question asked by many people at once. What is the text of the change? Who wrote it first? Which line was added and who benefits? There was a city that decided to privatize its water, not because a public hearing asked for it, but because a slide deck at a breakfast showed a line trending upward and another trending down. There was a state that offered a company a tax break so generous it meant buses ran less frequently and class sizes grew, not because anyone voted for that trade, but because a promise of jobs was inked on letterhead in a room with a view. There was a regulation that changed one word and turned safety testing into self-attestation. The press release said streamlined. The backroom said secured. Here is what the backroom counts on. It counts on your fatigue. It counts on the idea that this is just how the world works. It counts on the story that nothing changes without access, but doors have hinges, and hinges turn when enough hands press against them. The door does not swing because you shout at it. It swings because you learn its weight and push together at the right moment. You do not need to master 1,000 pages of legalese. You need to develop a small, stubborn habit. Read the second page, not only the first. If there is a summary, look for what it does not summarize. Follow the calendars. Watch who meets whom and when. When someone says stakeholders, ask who was at the table and who was on the menu. When a thing is rushed, ask for the clock to slow by 1 week and say why. When a person says, we cannot disclose that, ask for the statute that says so. The law is a cloak they wear only until someone gently lifts the edge and finds it is a curtain. Support the boring things with bright consequences. Sunshine laws, open meeting rules, public logs, independent audits. They sound like paperwork, but they are light switches. Encourage the official who posts a draft early, who takes questions on the record, who publishes their calendar in full sentences. Reward them with attention the way bad actors fear attention. Notice, thank, repeat. Rot the back room by making the outside more rewarding than the inside. And when the door clicks shut again, do not imagine that a conspiracy requires genius. It requires only convenience and habit. A group that meets because it is easier. A promise that becomes policy because no one wanted to be the person who made the phone call to stop it. You do not need to see every meeting to change what happens inside them. You need to change what is expected outside them. Listen for that quiet click. Imagine the millions who are not in the room. Then speak their names in your own room. Bring details, bring patience, bring company. Power arranged itself in private. Rearrange it in public. Keep the lights on, keep the questions coming, and make the door the last place where decisions happen, not the first. Imagine finding a locked room in your own house, paid for by you, that you are never allowed to enter. You see the door every day. You dust the knob, but the key is taken away and you are told to stop asking questions. That locked room has a name. It is called the black budget. Here is the trick. Money leaves your pocket with a polite label like defence, intelligence or research. Then, somewhere between the committee room and the contractor's gate, the label goes dark. Lines on a spreadsheet become asterisks. A paragraph in a report becomes a classified annex. And once those words appear, sources and methods, a curtain falls. From that point on, the answer to almost everything is trust us. People imagine the black budget is a single pot of money. It is not. It is more like a network of hidden streams. Some begin as innocuous maintenance funds. Some are tucked inside technology programs with clever names. Some move sideways through reprogramming authorities and emergency authorizations. Together, those streams swell into a river that no one outside a small circle is allowed to map. The size is described with careful phrases, significant, substantial, or in the interests of national security. Translation: do not look too closely. Oversight exists, but it often means a handful of elected officials ushered into a quiet room, briefed with selective slides, handed binders they cannot take home, and sworn to secrecy before they have had time to digest a single page. Ask for a detail, and the answer floats away under the fog of compartmentalization. You do not have the need to know. One committee knows a sliver. Another committee knows a different sliver. No one on the outside sees the whole picture, and the inside is carved into so many compartments that even the picture itself forgets it is a picture. If you follow the money, you find something else. The black budget is not an empty vault. It buys things. It buys steel and silicon and secrets. It buys silence. It buys laboratories without names and pilots without patches. It buys satellites that drift through the night and programs that move under code names like shadows. And it buys time, because the longer a project remains hidden, the harder it becomes to ask if it should have existed at all. Inside this world, the spreadsheet is upside down. Cost overruns can be rewarded when the contract is written to pay for cost. Delays can be excused when no one is allowed to know what is being built. A program can fail quietly, then be renamed, then be reborn, and all the while the ledgers become a labyrinth. Auditors knock, and the door answers with redactions. Watchdogs bark, and the hallway swallows the sound. Why does this persist? Fear is part of it. There are real dangers and real adversaries. The case for secrecy is easy to make in a dangerous world. For decades, secrecy has built armor and tools that saved lives. But secrecy also multiplies when it is not challenged. It protects what deserves protection, and then it protects the protection itself. Soon, the shield is not just over a project, it is over the idea of oversight. If you ask how much, you are told you are helping the enemy. If you ask who benefits, you are told the question is naive. If you ask whether the same officials who approve the projects later sit on the boards of the contractors, you are told that expertise must go somewhere. The consequences show up in strange places. Laws bend around unseen capabilities. The public hears about a breakthrough long after it is already in the field. Surveillance grows in the gaps where legislation never caught up. A war plan changes because a secret tool exists that few have ever heard of. Policy becomes a house with mirrors, where decisions seem to reflect each other, but the mirrors are arranged by hands no one can see. And yet, there is a simple test that can be spoken out loud and understood by anyone. If a program is too fragile to survive questions, it is too fragile to be funded. If a line item cannot be described in plain language to the people paying for it, then its guardians must carry the burden of proving why the language must be hidden. Not forever, not by habit. Not because someone somewhere stamped a phrase on a folder and walked away. Imagine that locked room again. The door is still closed. The sign still says classified, but there is a difference between a lock for safety and a lock for convenience. One protects people, the other protects power. The secret is not only in what is hidden, but in who gets to decide that hiding is normal. When hiding becomes normal, money flows without gravity, decisions harden without debate, and the room grows larger than the house. You do not need every code word to see the outline. You only need to listen for the silence where the answers should be. Ask simple questions until someone forgets how to dodge them. How much did it cost? Who approved it? What problem did it solve? When will it end? If the reply is always later, or elsewhere, or trust us, then the secret is not just a budget. It is a habit. And habits, unlike locked doors, can be broken. The quietest sound in the world is a pen sliding across a promise to never speak. Somewhere, in a lab with the lights still on, a device on a table hums with the kind of possibility that keeps people awake at night. It sips power. It works longer than it should. It makes something expensive look fragile. The room smells like dust and ozone and hope. And then the phone rings. By the time the call ends, the hum is gone, the table is clear, and a future that almost arrived is suddenly off the calendar. Here's how it happens over and over, without sirens, without riots, without anyone even noticing. A disruptive idea shows up on the radar of the people invested in keeping the map the same. Not evil scientists or cartoon villains, just managers with quarterly targets, traders who bet on stability, lawyers with binders. They do not have to win a debate. They only need to offer a deal, a meeting, a handshake, a check that solves an inventor's problems and creates new ones. The paper says you cannot talk. The paper says you cannot sell. The paper says this becomes our property and our property is to be quietly protected. The patent system, meant to reward openness, becomes the perfect velvet vault. Someone files an application, and the application becomes a thread that can be tugged forever. Continuations, divisions, paper shuffles. A forest of claims grows around the idea until no one can walk through without hitting a thorn. Or a company buys the patent, adds it to a portfolio, and then forgets it on purpose. Not failure. Strategy. The invention exists, it is owned, and because it is owned, it can be kept still. Sometimes the silence is not about profit, but about power. A clerk stamps a page with a secrecy order. That stamp is a trap door that drops the invention into a basement with no clocks. The inventor cannot publish, cannot sell, cannot even admit to the scope of the thing they built. And because it is all so official and so quiet, there is nothing to point at. The file sits. The world moves on with less than it could have had. If you were to follow the trail, it would look normal. A press release with careful language about alignment and strategic fit. A news blip about an acquisition with no numbers and lots of smiles. A patent that changes hands. Months pass. Years. The product never arrives. The company says priorities shifted. The engineer moves departments. The idea that could break a monopoly gets folded into the very monopoly it threatened, like a blade wrapped in velvet and placed back in the drawer. There are rumours. Light that lasts longer than it should. Storage that does not wear out. Fuel that does not come from the places power prefers. Some of those stories are fantasy. Some are half true. But the mechanism that buries them is not a myth. It is made of incentives. If you run a system built on selling replacements, a thing that refuses to break is a thesis killer. If you own infrastructure designed for scarcity, abundance is not a miracle. It is a write-down. If your market value depends on predictable pain, a painless alternative is not a breakthrough. It is an existential threat. It does not take a conspiracy in the shadows when the rule book out in the open already points to the same door. Tie it up in compliance. Make the standards committee blink. Raise the insurance requirements. Demand tests that cost more than the company is worth. Announce something similar. Ship a placeholder and steal the moment. Congratulations, the future has been delayed with nothing more than normal business. Ask the people who dream. They will tell you about the other pressure. The sleepless calculus of rent and lawsuits and college funds. The call arrives with a smile and a calendar. Sign here and your family is safe. Sign here and you will never have to worry again. Sign here and the fight you are not funded to win becomes someone else's choice. The paper is heavy. The ink is permanent. The door closes gently and the hallway echoes. What can be done? First, notice the patterns. The product that wins an award but never ships. The company that buys a rival's soul and then misplaces it. The patent that ages without a child. The standard that never quite approves the one thing that would flip the table. Ask why the solution always seems to come later, smaller, and more expensive than the rumour promised. Ask why repair is a crime. Ask why compatibility feels like treason. Ask why abundance keeps missing its flight. Second, reward the opposite of silence. Support inventors who publish openly, who license fairly, who choose transparency over the quick exit. Back policies that keep repair legal, that force interoperability, that expire the dead hands clutching old claims long past usefulness. Celebrate the companies that ship disruptive ideas instead of burying them. Make the cost of suppression higher than the cost of courage. Because it is courage, in the end, that pries open the drawer. The courage to say no to the easy out. The courage to ship something the room calls impossible. The courage to risk the meeting, the letter, the friendly threat. The quietest sound in the world is a pen on paper. The loudest is a switch clicking on for everyone and staying on, refusing to dim for profit, refusing to die for convenience. Somewhere a device hums again. Keep listening. Imagine waking up to find the fence line moved overnight. Not by inches, but by signatures. Not with bulldozers, but with paper. That's the quiet sound of land changing hands, while ordinary people go about their morning routines, believing the ground beneath them is still theirs. Here's the secret almost no one says out loud. Land rarely vanishes in dramatic scenes. It slips away through missed tax bills, confusing inheritance rules, code violations that stack up like falling leaves, or a letter that looked unimportant until it wasn't. Someone who can afford a good lawyer and a faster pen waits on the other side of that paper wall. When your guard drops, a bid is placed, a title is cleared, and a stranger's name goes where your families used to be. In small towns, a farm that fed 3 generations can be lost over one bad harvest and a tax auction that nobody knew was scheduled. In the city, an elderly neighbour gets a notice about a cracked step, then another, then a fee for not fixing it fast enough. Meanwhile, a shell company across town is collecting addresses like trading cards, ready to swoop in the moment a lien turns into a sale. Ordinary folks talk to each other over porches and gates. Elites talk to databases, attorneys, and insiders who know exactly when the auction clock hits 0. There are tricks hidden in polite words. Partition sales that can force a family to sell even if most want to keep the land. Cash offers that arrive after a storm when the roof is tarped and emotions are raw. Rezoning meetings announced on a weekday afternoon that decide whether your block stays livable or flips into a playground for someone else's money. Opportunity becomes a buzzword while the opportunity disappears from your street. You won't see the buyers on your corner because their names live inside limited liability companies with sunny titles. The acquisition comes through a manager who never sets foot on the grass. The plan doesn't need to be a grand conspiracy. It's a system that rewards patience, liquidity, and silence. It keeps the best information quiet and the worst surprises loud. And when the price of land rises, property taxes rise too. Families who finally paid off the mortgage find themselves squeezed by bills that don't care about memories, gardens, or the tree planted when a first child was born. A missed deadline becomes a late fee. A late fee becomes a lien. A lien becomes an auction. The auction becomes a shrug from a clerk and a handshake between people you never met. Here's what makes it sting. Once the land is gone, the rules change again. Rents creep upward, fences get taller, access to water, to a beach, to a lake path, or even to sunlight behind a new high wall turns scarce. The story gets rewritten so it sounds like progress, and anyone who remembers how it used to be is called sentimental. But a secret only stays powerful if we refuse to name it. So name it. Name the tricks that make ownership complicated for families and simple for corporations. Ask who benefits when heirs have to hire a lawyer just to keep grandma's name on the deed. Ask why a missed tax bill gets punished more harshly than a missed promise by a developer. Then do the simple, unglamorous things that block the quiet theft. Call your county office and learn exactly what happens if you miss a tax payment and how to get a payment plan before it becomes a crisis. If land is shared among family, write a plan now, on paper, so partition sales can't divide you. Learn what a homestead exemption is and claim it if you qualify. Join with neighbours to attend those weekday meetings and say no to rules that empty the block. Support community land trusts and cooperatives that keep homes off the speculation conveyor belt. Ask local leaders for transparency about who really owns those limited liability companies and push for the right of first refusal when large buyers target your street. The hidden land grab is not magic. It is patience, pressure, and paperwork. The defence is community, clarity, and time. Hold the fence line with knowledge. Make the signatures work for you. Keep the ground from moving under your feet without your say. If you wanted to steal power without leaving fingerprints, you would not break into a ballot box. You would move the walls around it. You would tilt the floor so that some people slide away before they even step inside. You would make the rules sound fair while they quietly fail the very people they claim to serve. That is the real trick, the art of election rigging that never makes headlines. Change the conditions, not the count. Start with the map. Not the kind you hang on a classroom wall, but the lines that decide which voices get to sit together and which are split apart. Change those lines, and you change the weight of a neighbourhood's choice without ever touching a single ballot. You can make a majority's will scatter like marbles on a table. And if anyone complains, you point to the map and say it is just geography, as if the map drew itself. Then there is the door to the polling place. You do not have to lock it, just make it inconvenient. Close locations in the busiest areas, shorten hours where people work late, reduce the number of machines where the lines are already long, and let time do what intimidation cannot. A line that winds around the block on a weekday afternoon is not a celebration of democracy. It is a test of stamina, of childcare, of bosses who do not understand. Some will pass, many will not, and the ones who turn back will leave no record that their voice was ever meant to be heard. The next trick lives in the paperwork. Rules that sound simple can be sharpened to a point. A missing middle initial. A signature that does not match because the pen was cold or the hand was rushed. An address format written the wrong way on a form designed to confuse rather than clarify. A ballot inside the wrong envelope. a second envelope never mentioned, an instruction printed so faint you need perfect light to see it. Each small technicality becomes a sieve, and the votes that fall through it are not counted as stolen. They are counted as spoiled, as if the voter ruined their own voice. Data does the rest. Not slogans on billboards, but whispers into your feed that vanish after you see them. Messages crafted to nudge one group to fully engage while nudging another to stay home. You do not need to change minds. You only need to change moods. Make it feel like turnout is hopeless, like the outcome is predetermined, like the effort is not worth the bus ride. People rarely tell a friend they did not vote because a dark ad told them not to. They just say they were busy, and the tactic smiles because that is exactly the point. Behind the curtain, there is the management of lists, the great pruning of who is allowed to show up. If you scrub the rolls hard enough, you will remove the dead and the duplicates. But you will also scrape away the living, the newly moved, the hyphenated names that the system does not love. When those people arrive, they are handed provisional ballots that live in a grey zone, and after the cameras leave, those ballots can quietly be challenged, set aside, or discarded. It is easy to deny something that was never fully accepted. Lawyers are part of the choreography, not the dramatic courtroom scenes, but filings crafted to disqualify rather than convince. Challenge the count here, redefine the standard there, create uncertainty that chills participation the next time. The rules of counting become a maze, and those who design the maze also hold the stopwatch. Money flows like water, finding the cracks the rules never imagined. It does not need to buy votes when it can buy the conditions around them. Fund a wave of bland-sounding groups that flood the zone with near information that looks official. Sponsor training for poll watchers who are not there to help, but to hover, to glare, to question every step until the room feels less like a civic ritual and more like a customs inspection. Invest in the quiet races that control the machinery, the clerks and boards and administrators whose names few remember, but whose pens decide what gets counted and when. Even the way we talk about elections becomes a lever. Frame close races as chaos. Frame administrative hiccups as scandal only when it benefits your side. Turn trust itself into a partisan commodity, so that every normal imperfection becomes a reason for the other side to stay home. When trust erodes, the most disciplined minority gains power by default, while the majority argues with itself about whether the system is worth saving. Everything is technically legal, or at least technically arguable, which is often the same thing. That is the elegance of these tactics. They thrive in the space between intent and impact, in the bureaucratic fog where no single decision feels like a crime, but the sum of them feels like a theft. And when the final numbers appear, the result looks clean. The headlines say someone won by a few points, and there is no photograph of the moment the will of the people was bent, because the bending happened in 100 small places where cameras rarely point. So how do you break the trick? First, you name it. Not with grand accusations, but with precise language. Lines that carve communities are not neutral. Long lines are not a civic tradition to be admired. Rules that reject valid ballots are not accidents to be forgiven. Speak about these things in plain terms. Learn the rules of your place, because the rules are the arena. Check your status long before it matters. Help someone else check theirs. Ask where the drop boxes are, where the early sites are, how signatures are verified, not on the day of the election, but months before. Demand transparency for the software, the contracts, the trainings, the audits. The people who prefer shadows hate the sound of questions asked in daylight. The secret is not that elections are faked. The secret is that the conditions are shaped. Power changes hands, not just at the moment of the count, but in all the quiet choices that lead to it. See those choices, and the spell weakens. Refuse to be nudged into silence. Talk with your neighbours, not at them. Collect receipts of your civic life the way you would for your finances. And remember that a line is more than a cue. It is a story of a community deciding together. Keep that story going with patience, with attention, with the stubborn insistence that every voice, every time, should make it all the way into the light. Paperwork can cast a longer shadow than any skyscraper, and in that shade is where the real river of money runs. Most people imagine money moving through bright, polished bank lobbies. You walk in, open an account, and the rules are clear. But there is another world that behaves like banking without being called a bank. It borrows short, lends long, invents credit from promises, and moves at a speed that traditional rules can barely track. People call it shadow banking, not because it is always illegal, but because it lives in spaces where sunlight and oversight rarely land. Think of it like a network of back alleys behind the main street of finance. Hedge funds, private credit firms, money market funds, mortgage lenders, finance companies, and entities with names so bland you forget them as you read them. They do not take deposits the way a bank does, so they sidestep a lot of the rules you think protect the system. Yet they still perform the same magic trick that makes modern finance work. They turn piles of long-term IOUs into cash right now. Here is a simple picture. A lender issues a loan. Instead of keeping it, that loan is bundled with others and sold to a special shell whose only job is to hold those loans. That shell issues new promises to investors who want a little extra yield but do not want to wait years. Meanwhile, to keep the machine humming, the shell borrows day by day from someone else, often using the loans as collateral. Those overnight loans have a polite name, but they are really speed dating for money. Every dawn, everything must be renewed. If confidence hiccups, if one big player pauses and says, "Not today," that polite machinery can snap. When it snaps, it does not just hurt traders. It can freeze payrolls, shutter factories, and spill cold water on the plans of families who did nothing wrong. Why does this world exist? Cost and controlled. Being a real bank is expensive. You need capital. You answer to many watchdogs. You keep rainy day reserves. In the shadows, entities can promise nearly the same service without those costs. They can move faster, stack leverage higher, and design products so complicated that the risk looks like it vanished. It did not vanish. It moved. It moved into footnotes, into offshore homes with brass nameplates, into contracts no one has time to read, into places where, when things go wrong, the searchlights arrive too late. The secret is not that shadow banking is hidden in darkness. The secret is that it survives in plain sight through complexity. When you hear soothing words like liquidity, transformation, and structured, what you are really hearing is a story about turning slow money into fast money with thin threads. Those threads can hold for a long time, until they do not. History has already shown how a run can begin outside the old banking halls. Long before a regulator can lift a whistle, investors yank their funds from short-term vehicles that felt as safe as a savings account. A fund misses a promise by a sliver, and panic spreads through markets that only insiders knew were interconnected. The shock gets handed back to ordinary people as higher borrowing costs, vanishing jobs, and politicians arguing over emergency measures that should not have been needed in the first place. So why is it still allowed? Because the shadow pays. It pays issuers with cheap funding. It pays investors with a little extra return. It pays lobbyists to argue that tinkering would starve small businesses and slow innovation. It pays in a currency regulators know too well. The risk that if they push too hard, the activity migrates even further away, beyond their reach entirely. And then there is the revolving door, where those who design the rules step gracefully into jobs managing the loopholes. No single villain pulls the strings. The structure itself, built from incentives, is the puppeteer. Yet this is not a story of doom. It is a story of attention. You do not need a finance degree to spot the tells. When a product promises safety and a little extra, ask what happens in a storm. When cash is supposedly parked for any day access, ask who must say yes each morning for that to be true. When a fund brags about secrecy as a strategy, remember that opacity is not a moat, it is a blindfold. Look for the simplest paths for your own money, the ones where you can explain in plain words how it earns, who holds it, and what could go wrong. Ask professionals direct questions and listen for straight answers. Vote for people who understand that oversight should follow function, not labels, and that credit creation in the shadows is still credit creation. The goal is not to kill the back alley. The goal is to light it well enough that its promises are honest and its failures do not blow through your front door. The shadow banking secret is that the system you rely on for paychecks, mortgages and dreams already depends on that hidden river. It will not evaporate, but shadows shrink when watched. And the more we learn to look past the marble halls to the busy alleys behind them, the fewer surprises we will be asked to pay for. They do not shatter reputations with a hammer. They warm them with a whisper until the surface sags and slides away. Here is the quiet craft of it. A target is chosen, not because of one mistake, but because removing them clears a path, protects a secret, or pays back an old debt. The architects look for a hairline crack, a joke out of context, an awkward photo, a messy argument from years ago, something small, true enough to hold a hook, but elastic enough to stretch. Then the whisper begins. A burner account posts a vague hint. A throwaway blog asks a leading question. An anonymous message lands in an inbox with a line that reads, "People are saying." The seed is never a heavy accusation. It is softer. It is doubt. It is maybe. Maybe is easy to share. Maybe feels safe. Now the echo. The same talking point appears in different places with different costumes. A forum thread, a meme page, a comment under a live stream. The phrases match like fingerprints, but no one looks that closely. Accounts with pets for profile pictures pile on. A few blue check voices snark from the edges, which gives permission for a louder pile on. Screenshots float free from their source. Clips are trimmed to trim the truth. A pattern is born. The goal is not proof. The goal is heat. Heat draws eyes, and eyes draw platforms, and platforms reward what keeps hearts racing. Algorithms do not read, they measure. Attention becomes acceleration. You feel it when you scroll. Your chest tightens, your jaw locks, your thumb taps. Share before your mind taps pause. That is the plan working on you. Next comes the laundering. A gossip post becomes a blog post, becomes a newsletter, becomes a panel discussion. Each link points to another link until the original claim is hidden inside a maze of citation. People start sentences with, "I am not saying it is true, I am just asking questions." That phrase is a crowbar. It pries the door without leaving fingerprints. When the target finally responds, the frame is already set. If they deny it, the chorus says, "Look how defensive." If they ignore it, the chorus says, silence speaks. If they apologize for something adjacent, that apology is pasted onto the accusation and worn like a label. Every path is booby-trapped. That is why so many feel stuck, guilty or not. Smear campaigns work because they hack human nature. We are story animals. We like simple tales with a villain we can point to and a moral we can say out loud. We remember what scares us and what angers us more than what calms us. We want to belong, so we mirror the mood of the crowd. We mistake repetition for truth. We mistake confidence for evidence. Here is how to break the spell. Slow the scroll. Breathe before you believe. Ask who benefits if I share this. Trace the first time the claim appeared. If you cannot find the beginning, you may be inside a fog machine. Listen for repeated wording that shows up in many mouths at once. That is a script leaking through the costume. Look for full context, not just a juicy slice. A clip that cuts right before a sentence ends is a sign. Ask if there are verifiable facts, dates, documents, and if corrections are clear and as loud as the original flair. Pay attention to tone. If the piece only pushes you toward rage or disgust and never toward understanding, you are being used for fuel. If you are the target, document everything. Save messages. Keep timelines. Speak once, clearly, with receipts people can check without joining a private group or surrendering an email. Then let trusted voices who know your work carry the next part. Do not feed every fire. Fire eats what you give it and then asks for more. Put your attention into the places where your real life lives. Ask for help early, not after the dam breaks. There is no prize for being stoic in a storm. Notice the bargain the smear offers. It says, share this and you belong with the smart and the brave. It says, pile on and you are protecting the world. But the secret is that the smear does not want justice. It wants control. It wants to teach everyone watching that a whisper can end a life. So the next time it whispers from the shadows, you will fall in line. We can refuse that lesson. We can be the kind of audience that starves rumors and feeds corrections. We can make it normal to say, I do not know yet. We can reward patience in the same way we reward hot takes. We can build small circles that practice checking, not just cheering. We can turn our attention into a tool that cuts cleaner than any smear by aiming it at the full picture and the hard truth. A reputation is a public garden. It needs care from more than one pair of hands. Smear campaigns sow salt. The counter is simple, and it is slow. Water the real. Pull the weed. Leave the whisper to die on dry ground. Picture a hand reaching for a light switch during a blackout, not to restore the light, but to lock the door. That is how crisis exploitation works. When the ground shakes or the markets crash, when storms rip roofs off homes or headlines scream about threats you cannot see, someone is already moving in the shadows, turning fear into leverage. The siren is not just a warning, it is a cover. The secret is not really a secret at all once you learn to see it. In calm times, bold grabs for power and wealth face pushback. People ask questions, legislators debate, journalists pry, but in moments of panic, scrutiny thins out. The public wants relief. The clock is loud, and the language of urgency, words like emergency, temporary, necessary, opens doors that would stay shut in the light of day. Those doors lead to bigger budgets, broader surveillance, sweeter contracts, and rules rewritten while everyone is looking the other way. Here is the pattern. Before disaster, there is preparation, but not the kind you expect. Wish lists sit in drawers. Draft laws are written and waiting. Talking points are tested. Allies are placed inside key committees. When the shock hits, These plans do not walk, they sprint. Complex bills arrive overnight. Funds are routed to trusted hands with little bidding. Oversight is promised later. Later rarely comes. Follow the money and the megaphone. Relief packages tilt toward the already powerful. Loans get forgiven at the top and collected at the bottom. Land, marked as blighted, becomes prime real estate after residents are priced out. Security budgets swell, then never shrink. New technologies slide from pilot programs into permanent surveillance. You are told it is for your safety. You are told it will be brief. The new normal settles in quietly, like dust after a demolition. Language does a lot of heavy lifting during a crisis. Beware the phrases that end discussions before they start. Too big to fail, no time to waste. Trust us. Classified. Experts agree. Real experts do not fear questions. Real solutions can survive sunlight. If someone insists you must accept sweeping change without seeing the receipts, you are not buying safety, you are buying a story. This tactic thrives on speed and fog. Decisions are rushed, numbers are vague, plans are announced without details, and by the time the details are public, the deal is done. The playbook counts on you looking away when your life is already upside down. It counts on fatigue. It counts on your better nature, your desire to help, your urge to believe that authority will fix the mess. But authority often has its own list of priorities, and you are rarely at the top. How do you spot the grab as it is happening? Watch for sudden, sweeping powers with no clear end date. Look for relief directed to entities that were struggling long before the disaster. Track who drafts the emergency rules and whether the people most affected by them had a seat at the table. Pay attention to the fine print you are told not to worry about. The action often hides there, in the exemptions, in the definitions, in the phrases that sound technical but translate to open doors and blank checks. And ask 3 simple questions, even when the room is noisy. Who benefits today? Who benefits when the panic ends? What becomes permanent? If the same names win in all 3 answers, you are not witnessing rescue. You are witnessing consolidation. This is not a call to ignore real danger. It is a call to keep your eyes open while you seek real relief. Demand sunset clauses that actually sunset. Demand independent audits that happen before the confetti falls. Support those who do the slow, boring work of follow-up when the cameras have moved on. Do not let urgency become a magic trick that swaps your consent for their control. Crisis can bring out the best in people who show up with food, with blankets, with open hands. It can also bring out the best in opportunists who show up with contracts, with talking points, with open briefcases. The difference is in the outcomes. One restores what was lost, or builds something fairer. The other rearranges the map so the same few hold the high ground forever. Remember the hand at the light switch. In the dark, you can feel the direction of the lock. You can ask for the lights to be turned back on before the hinges rust. You can learn to hear the difference between the sound of help arriving and the sound of doors closing. When the sirens fade, the memory remains, and so do the policies written under their cover. The crisis exploitation secret is not unbeatable. It survives on your distraction. It dissolves in your attention. Keep your focus when the room spins, and the room will stop spinning faster than they want it to. The scoreboard says fair play. The rule book whispers otherwise. That whisper has a name: the Subsidy Secret. The part that looks like a helping hand, but somehow always finds the hand that is already holding the trophy. Most of us were taught to believe subsidies are boosters for the strugglers, little ramps that level a steep road. But look closely at how the road is paved. Again and again, the biggest players are the ones getting the smooth asphalt, the toll passes, the special lanes. Not by accident, by habit, by design dressed up as common sense. Picture a town with a beloved bakery. Fresh bread, early mornings, the owner knows your kids' names. A national chain arrives with glossy signage and a smile. Both say they create jobs. The difference: the chain gets a tax holiday, a grant for renovations, and a promise of upgraded utilities right to their doorstep. The small bakery keeps paying full freight and fixes a sputtering oven with duct tape and grit. That is not a contest. That is a coronation. We see the same pattern in energy, in agriculture, in finance. The leaders call it stability. And who among us is against stability? The promise sounds like keeping the lights on, keeping food on shelves, keeping risk out of the system. But the way it often works is simpler. Risk is kept out for the biggest players and kept in for everyone else. If a giant stumbles, the net appears. If a newcomer leaps, the ground stays hard. Let's name what is happening underneath. Power rewards familiarity. Bureaucracies prefer the applicant with the longest history. A subsidy panel looks at an emerging player and sees uncertainty. It looks at the incumbent and sees certainty. Certainty wins. Psychologically, entrenched systems reward the pattern they already recognize. And once a pattern gets chosen, it becomes the default story the next committee believes on sight. Now, here's the quiet magic trick. When the biggest companies receive the most help, the help becomes invisible. It blends into the background like the hum of an air conditioner. You hear it only when it stops. Discounts turn into assumed rights. Guarantees turn into best practices. The subsidy isn't a line item anymore, it is the climate. And in that climate, saplings struggle while tall trees create their own shade. We don't have to treat this like a conspiracy with a villain in a back room. It is more ordinary, which makes it more powerful. The same logic that keeps us buying the brand we already know keeps committee members funding the applicant they already trust. Familiarity lowers the heartbeat. Novelty raises it. And so the subsidy that was meant to encourage courage ends up underwriting caution. So what changes when we see the pattern? First, we stop blaming the underdog for not running fast enough when the track is tilted. Second, we stop confusing size with safety. True safety comes from resilience, from more entrants, from many creative bets, not from pouring concrete around a few giants and calling it order. Try swapping the questions. Instead of who has the most to lose if we don't fund them, ask who has the most to prove if we do. Instead of who guarantees results, ask who expands possibilities. Instead of how do we reduce risk to incumbents, ask how do we reduce risk to the public by diversifying power. A quick story shows why this matters. A city wants cleaner transit. The largest vendor proposes a familiar fleet and a predictable contract. A small team offers a modular pilot with new tech, measured in neighbourhoods, not bragging rights. The old route feels safer because it is familiar, but resilience comes from adding options, not doubling down. Fund the pilot and you learn. Fund only the giant, and you lock in yesterday's answers with tomorrow's money. We can make subsidies honest by aiming them at thresholds, not thrones. Reward first hires, first exports, first patents, first successful pilots. Make the on-ramps thick and the moats thin. Tie support to openness, shared data, interoperable standards, apprenticeships that spread skills beyond one logo. This is not anti-business. It is pro-dynamism. It is pro-us. And yes, we can tell this story in a way that lands. Begin with what we feel is off. Surface the idea that explains it. Show the picture we can all recognize. Share the reason it works this way, and end with what we choose next. Here is the choice. Keep watering the tallest trees and call it rain, or turn on the sprinklers so the whole forest grows. The subsidy secret is not a mystery. It is a habit. Habits change when we name them, when we see who they serve, and when we decide to serve more of us. That is how a system remembers what subsidies were meant to be. Not a trophy polish, but a true push for the people still climbing. Imagine waking up to find your name already signed on a contract you never saw, with penalties you never agreed to, and a lock-in clause that outlives every election. That is the quiet reality of secret treaties. They are the deals struck behind closed doors, sealed with handshakes and classified folders, and then carried out in your name. No ballot, no town hall, no choice. Here is how it happens. When leaders sit down to negotiate, the public theatre is the press conference. The real drama lives in the annexes, the side letters, the memoranda that never see daylight. Some are kept secret for national security. Some are marked confidential to protect negotiations. Some are simply never published in full because that would make them harder to pass. They can be called treaties, or they can wear softer names like executive agreements or understandings, but the effect is the same. Obligations that shape your economy, your privacy, your environment, and your foreign policy for years, sometimes for decades. Imagine a clause that lets foreign investors sue your government in special tribunals if a new law cuts into profits. Imagine that tribunals' hearings are private. Its judges are not really judges, and the public learns about the decision only after a bill arrives, demanding compensation taken from public budgets. That is how a single sentence, tucked in a late-night draft, can outweigh a landslide vote the next morning. Imagine a defense deal with secret basing rights, surveillance cooperation, and mutual immunity provisions that shield contractors from local courts. You do not see the fine print. You only notice when a road is closed, when a new restriction appears, when a lawsuit disappears. Secrecy is not new. Power has always had its backrooms. What has changed is the reach of those rooms. The language of modern deals is technical enough to lull an audience to sleep. It talks about stability, predictability, harmonization. It assures everyone that it is routine. But ordinary words can become extraordinary chains. Stability means you cannot change course without paying a price. Predictability means a corporation can predict your government will not try to regulate too boldly. Harmonization means your local standard must kneel to a higher one you did not pick. You may ask, why keep it secret at all? Sometimes secrecy protects a negotiation. Sometimes it protects a lobby. If the details of a pharmaceutical pricing clause came out early, the public might object loudly and clearly. If the terms of a data-sharing pact surfaced, privacy advocates might derail it. If a pollution carve-out saw daylight, a mayor might rally a city against it. In the quiet, however, the argument goes that grown-ups need to make compromises without the noise of democracy. The trouble is, the quiet keeps echoing long after the negotiators leave. Laws get written to comply. Budgets get cut to pay awards. Agencies shift priorities. And the public discovers the deal only when it bites. How do these deals hide? Through classification stamps that treat trade like state secrets. through fast-track procedures that bundle hundreds of pages into a take-it-or-leave-it vote, through side letters that do not appear in the main text but bind just the same, through reservations and interpretive notes that only specialists bother to read, through arbitration rules that treat filings like private property, through sunset clauses that outlive the leaders who signed them. When a government changes, the signature stays. When a scandal breaks, the obligations remain. There are consequences that do not fit neatly into a headline. A school closes because a payout had to be made. A clinic delays opening because a foreign investor challenged a new health rule. A city cannot reclaim a public service without triggering a penalty. A farm's water supply shrinks, and there is no easy appeal because the relevant authority sits in a conference centre in another country. These are not hypotheticals pulled from a thriller. They are the shadow of a design choice, to let big choices be made by small circles. This is not a message of despair. It is a map. The first step is to know what to look for. Watch for phrases like investor protection, stabilization, national treatment, mutual recognition, and security exemption. Watch for commitments that freeze regulations at a particular moment in time. Watch for dispute settlement clauses that bypass local courts. Watch for confidentiality provisions that outlast the agreement itself. If a leader says a deal is routine but cannot share the text, that is your cue to ask harder questions and keep asking. What does accountability look like? It looks like publishing full texts and all side letters before signature, not after. It looks like opening negotiating mandates to public debate. It looks like independent impact assessments that are not written by parties with a stake in the outcome. It looks like removing secret tribunals and insisting on transparent courts. It looks like sunset clauses that truly sunset, with clean exits rather than traps that keep obligations alive. It looks like giving legislators and citizens enough time to read, consult, and respond. It looks like watching who sits on advisory committees, who drafts the language, and who profits from every comma. Your voice matters most before the ink dries. After that, the machinery of implementation rolls on with a momentum that is hard to stop. Join the dots between a closed committee meeting and a sudden policy shift. Support journalists who pry open these files. Back watchdog groups that file requests and fight redactions. Encourage local leaders to demand seat-at-the-table rights, not briefings after the fact. When a proposal surfaces, ask where the enforcement happens, who pays if it goes wrong, and how you can measure what it promises. If the answers arrive as fog, push for light. Power prefers a whisper. Democracy requires a conversation. The secret treaty secret is not that deals exist. It is that their costs and constraints are designed to stay hidden until they are too expensive to undo. The way out is not rage, but relentless clarity. Name the hidden clauses. Question the sealed rooms. Demand that obligations made in your name be negotiated in your sight. And remember the image from the beginning. A contract with your signature, written by someone else. The moment you insist on reading it first is the moment the room gets brighter and the pen finally moves to your hand. Before the first yard sign goes up, before the first handshake in a diner, a name is whispered in a quiet room, where the doors shut soft and the glasses never empty. A few heads nod, a few phones buzz, and just like that, the race has begun long before anyone gets a chance to vote. The public will see a smile and a slogan. The people in that room see an investment. Here is the secret. The strings are not hidden in some smoky backroom from a movie. They are in plain sight, threaded through donor lists, bundled checks, and friendly committees with names that sound like sunshine. A would-be leader is measured not by courage or clarity, but by reliability. Will they stay on script? Will they return the calls? Will they know who to thank when the cameras are off? The first audition is not on a debate stage. It is in the donor briefing. A staffer opens a binder. Polling lines are highlighted. Words to avoid are circled. There is a photo of a factory and a promise about jobs, and somewhere off to the side there is a separate page with the real plan. That plan is not for the crowd in the gym. It is for the people who write the big checks and expect returns like any smart investor. If you listen closely, you can hear the choreography. A candidate says, "We must unleash small businesses," and a lobbyist's draft bill appears later with a clause so technical that almost no one notices. A candidate vows to protect your retirement, and a donor lunch ends with a wink toward a fee change that shifts money like a quiet tide. A candidate promises clean energy, and the transition team adds an advisor whose firm just happens to love a certain tax credit. None of this is scandalous on paper. That is the brilliance of it. It is all perfectly proper, perfectly timed, perfectly legal. All the while, the public faces a choice that feels free but is already filtered. The party gatekeepers have made calls. The friendly papers have profiled the acceptable options. Primary challengers without the right friends are starved for airtime and money until they are called unrealistic, then unelectable, and then gone. The puppet strings are not a single tug. They are a web. Step into it, and every move is guided by 10 quiet hands you never see on stage. Ask anyone who has tried to run without the blessing. The meeting requests stop getting returned. The consultants who shape your message suddenly cost too much. The pollster who could help you frame a tough idea is booked. The television slot your campaign needed goes to a rival who smiles at the same rooms you could not get into. In politics, momentum is not just votes. It is permission. And permission is granted by people who expect to be obeyed. The daily schedule tells the story. A politician spends hours each day, not in town halls, but on the phone. Headset on, reading a script that tries to sound personal. Thank you for your support. Can we count on you for a little more? The targets are precise. The language is tested. The promise is always just specific enough to feel meaningful and just vague enough to leave room for the real conversation that will happen later, away from microphones. When the law finally appears, it arrives bloated, with paragraphs written by those who have the patience and the payroll to write them. What looks like complexity is strategy. Complexity hides priorities. It wraps a favor in jargon, so dense that even diligent reporters need a week to decode it, and by then, public outrage has moved on to the next fire. If a line slips through that harms a donor's interest, the fix slides in before lunch the next day. Every now and then, a politician tries to cut the strings. They refuse the call. They vote against the aligned interest. They talk about the thing they were told to leave alone. Watch what happens after. The committee assignments disappear. The fundraising dries up. The next primary comes with a smiling opponent who seems to have materialized from nowhere, but really they stepped out of a waiting room that is always full. The message is surgical. You can win, but not against your benefactors. So how does a person keep their soul in a system like this? First, they learn to tell themselves a story. It goes like this. If I play the game now, I can do good later. If I give a little, I can give back more. The story is comforting. It softens the edges of compromise until compromise feels like leadership, But later rarely comes. Later is always one more election away, one more donor call away, one more promise away. Meanwhile, voters do their best. They show up. They listen. They hope. They argue over a few lines in a speech, while the real script hums under the floorboards, written by people who never raise their voices because they never have to. There is no villain in a cape. There is only a network that learned how to make patience and paperwork more powerful than outrage and applause. The curtain can only lift when enough people refuse to clap for a show they did not choose. That means asking what is paid for and by whom. It means caring about the money map as much as the message. It means demanding daylight on the meetings, the memos, the promises that are never read from a stage. It means noticing when the same companies sponsor every path to power and then asking whether power still belongs to the people who line up in the rain to use it. The puppet politician's secret is not that the strings exist. It is that the audience was taught not to look up. So look up. Follow the lines to the hands that hold them. Remember that a marionette only dances because someone at the top believes you will never see them. When you do, the show changes. Not at once, not like a fairy tale, but slowly, stubbornly, with the kind of pressure that does not shout. It just refuses to let go. Picture a lock built to outlive the hands that turned the key. That is the quiet genius of classification, not just to hide, but to wait you out. A scandal can survive a season, maybe a year. A sealed folder can survive a lifetime. And by the time it opens, the people who could be held to account are gone. The public mood has shifted, and the chapter reads more like a dusty footnote than a live investigation. The trick is the clock. Call it national security, call it sources and methods, call it protecting delicate negotiations. The labels sound noble, and sometimes they are. But inside the walls of bureaucracy, they become a language of delay. Stamp a memo secret, then extend the deadline. Grant an exemption, then another. Promise transparency tomorrow, just not today. Meanwhile, the headlines move on. Witnesses retire, memories blur, and the fiercest outrage cools into a shrug. When the folder finally surfaces decades later, what looked like a roaring fire now seems like old smoke. This is how power buries itself without ever digging a hole. It does not need to erase, it only needs to postpone. Give it 20 years, then another 5, then ask an interagency panel to review the redactions, then inform the public that releasing the full truth could cause harm that frankly cannot be explained. The language is always careful. No apologies, just process. No guilt, just gravity. And in the margins of those pages, black bars grow like vines, covering names, locations, decisions, chains of authorization. The core facts remain just barely visible, as if seen through fogged glass, and the story nobody wants you to understand stays intact. People imagine secrecy as a fortress, but the real fortress is routine. A clerk with a rubber stamp, a lawyer fluent in the phrase foreseeable harm, an office that never meets a deadline, a filing system that misplaces exactly the box you need. Add just one more review. Add just one more signature. Add just one more reason to wait. The machine works because each step is small and reasonable, and together they form a staircase that climbs far beyond the public's patience. Ask why, and you will hear about safety, stability, and the delicate fabric of diplomacy. Again, sometimes that is true, but buried among the genuine protections are documents sealed not to protect the public, but to protect reputations, careers, contracts, and choices that would not survive daylight. Embarrassment becomes a kind of national security in its own right, A quiet category that never appears on the memo but echoes in the decision to keep the lid screwed down. It is easier to defend a decision no one can see. Secrecy does not just shield the past, it shapes the present. A few people knowing what others do not is a lever. Maybe a vote leans this way, maybe a contract leans that way, maybe a phone call ends with a suggestion that never needs to be spoken out loud. The existence of the file, even closed, can move a career. The rumour of what is inside can move a budget. The promise that it will all be revealed someday is a promise designed to be safe, because someday is not a deadline, it is a horizon. Even the release can be a performance. Make it a late afternoon on a quiet day. Deliver a stack so large no one can read it quickly. Let the pages arrive in a format that cannot be searched. Celebrate the openness, while the cuts do the real work. The scandal becomes a maze, and by the time someone maps it, the moment to act has passed. So what breaks the spell? Not one thing. Pressure, persistence, and precision. Ask narrow questions instead of broad ones. Demand dates, not platitudes. Support the people who pry open the past, from archivists who live inside the stacks to the few judges who actually read the pages and ask why the ink is there. Protect the messengers who risk careers to pull a single sheet from a pile. Do not be dazzled by thickness. Look for the missing line. Do not be pacified by partial disclosure. Listen for the silence between the sentences. Most of all, remember the clock. If the truth is delayed long enough, it can look harmless by the time it arrives. That is the design. Not to prove innocence, but to soften reaction. Not to answer questions, but to make questions feel late. The classified document secret is not a single stamp or a locked box. It is time as a tool, used with patience and purpose, until outrage decays into history and power keeps its shape. When you hear that a matter is too sensitive to discuss, ask how long it will be sensitive. Ask who decided the timeline, and ask what lies in the space between now and someday. That gap is where scandals go to sleep, and where the world we live in is quietly arranged. You can hear a war before you see it. The sound is not gunfire, it is the click of a pen on a contract. Every public reason has a private ledger. Speeches talk about freedom, justice, and safety, but ships do not carry speeches. They carry oil that lights cities, metals that power batteries, rare earth minerals that make satellites whisper across the sky. When the slogans are tall and shining, look down at the cargo holds. That is where the truth rides. Think about the map, not as borders and flags, but as veins and arteries. Pipelines snake across deserts. Shipping lanes carve blue roads through the sea. Rail lines and highways stitch ports to mines and refineries. If a valley holds copper, it becomes a valley of interest. If a strait can choke an ocean's traffic, it becomes a geopolitical throat. If a river can turn turbines, it becomes a bargaining chip. The battlefield is only the visible stage. Backstage is a negotiation room, smelling faintly of ink, leather, and opportunity. Here is how the trick is usually done. First, a noble cause arrives, urgent and undeniable. There is a tyrant, a terror, a crisis, a humanitarian plea. The drumbeat is steady, the moral case strong, but alongside that moral case, almost never mentioned, is a cargo list. Crude reserves, natural gas basins, lithium under salt flats, cobalt in the rock, timber in old forests, water behind a dam yet to be built. The talking points are about values. The briefings are about volumes. Second, outrage is curated. Images, sometimes true and heartbreaking, are elevated to make the choice feel simple. Heroes stand up. Enemies are named, lines are drawn. But while outrage ignites the public, the private calls begin. Consultancy decks fly across inboxes. Think tanks model supply disruptions. Lobbyists coordinate narratives. Investors look at futures and smile that strange, thin smile that only appears when risk has a predictable sponsor. Third, boots land or sanctions bite, or bases expand under banners that read protection, partnership, stabilization. The stated goal is to end suffering, to deter aggression, to steady markets for the good of all. And yes, sometimes chaos is contained, sometimes a dictator falls, but the contracts that follow do not march in parades. They are signed quietly. Extraction rights, port concessions, pipeline routes, long leases with soft terms for favoured companies. A new security corridor appears to protect a lifeline. A new training mission shadows a mineral belt. A new aid package funds roads that just happen to lead from a mine to a port. The fourth step is myth-making. The story gets written while the dust still hangs in the air, a victory for ideals, a necessary stand, a solemn duty fulfilled. The monuments say one thing, the spreadsheets say another. Years later, when the files are declassified and the memoirs trickle out, you can sometimes see the hints. A memo that fixated on energy. A meeting about refining capacity. A question in a margin. How fast can we ramp extraction if the perimeter is secure? But by then, the contracts are old, the wealth already moved. This is not a tale about one nation, one era, or one ideology. The resource war secret is not a conspiracy of a handful of villains. It is a system with predictable incentives. Industrial revolutions do not run on words. They run on what is dug, pumped, dammed, logged and shipped. Smartphones insist on cobalt and coltan. Wind turbines insist on rare earths. Data centers insist on power that flows steadily through the night. Cars turned electric still ask the ground to give up lithium and nickel. Under every green promise is a new map of extraction. Under every new map is a set of hands that will fight to hold it. Water is the quietest example. You cannot bottle liberty, but you can bottle a river. Dams on highlands decide the fate of faraway plains. Irrigation channels decide whether a harvest feeds a nation or fails. As glaciers retreat and rainfall shifts, aquifers become vaults. Whoever holds the valve will be invited to every negotiation. They might never fire a shot. They will not need to. Of course, not every intervention is a lie, and not every conflict is born in a boardroom. People fight for dignity, for survival, for things that cannot be monetized. But when the reason for war feels abstract and the aftermath looks like a ribbon of steel toward a port, ask the plain question that pierces ceremony. Who benefits from what lies beneath? Who guards the roots that make it move? Who signs the deals when the cameras go home? Follow the chain from mine to refinery, from wellhead to tanker, from contract to campaign donation, and the noble language begins to sound like a curtain. Pull it back and you find familiar furniture. A legal team, a lobbyist with a calendar full of working lunches, a strategist tracing a finger along a coastline, and stopping at a bay deep enough for very large ships. Nobody puts that on a poster. They do not need to. Most people never look that far. So the antidote is not cynicism. It is clarity. When the call to arms echoes, listen for the freight humming behind it. When a headline shouts, read the balance sheets that whisper. Ask where the pipelines will go. Ask which ports will be expanded. Ask whose land, whose water, whose labour will pay the price for a cause that looks beautiful from a distance. Wars need stories to recruit hearts. Resources need corridors to reach markets. The secret is that these two needs have been shaking hands for longer than living memory. then pretending they never met. Once you see the handshake, it is hard to unsee. And that is the beginning of power that does not require a gun. Only the courage to keep your eyes open when the flags start to wave and the contracts begin to click. A bell rings long before the market opens, but most people never hear it. It's a quiet bell, more like a whisper travelling through boardrooms, law offices, and private dinners. By the time the public hears the news, the whisper has already circled the room, picked its winners, and slipped out the back door. Picture two friends in a coffee shop after work. One scrolls his phone, sighs, and says, "I cannot believe it. This stock exploded today. I was looking at it last week." The other friend shrugs, stirs her drink, and admits she bought in yesterday. He blinks. Yesterday? She leans closer. A client hinted something was coming. Not a headline, just a feeling. The first friend is quiet, half stunned, half angry, thinking, "Am I playing a different game?" That's the insider trading secret. People rarely say out loud. It's not a magical formula, it's proximity. It's being close enough to hear the bell before it rings in public. Inside, information does not shout. It trickles. It rides taxis between downtown meetings. It slides across a table with the dessert. It lives in the space between what someone knows and what they can legally act on. If you have ever felt the market is a casino where someone can see the dealer's next card, your instinct is not wrong. Imagine sitting at a poker table where a few players wear mirrored glasses and the rest of us just convince ourselves our hands are fine. The result is predictable. The players with the early peak win more often. People at the edges copy their moves, and the crowd confuses luck with skill. The story repeats until everyone believes it is normal. Psychologically, this is where unfairness flips a switch. When we sense the rules tilt, we either get reckless trying to catch up or passive because what is the point? That swing, rage to resignation, keeps the machine running because it pulls attention to spectacle and away from structure. Grounding what you are feeling in simple psychology matters. Naming the pattern turns fog into something you can navigate, and it steadies the mind for better decisions. And it helps to use a concrete scene like that coffee shop moment, because stories let us see the moving parts clearly before we talk about principles. Here is the reframe that can change how you move. The common belief says the secret is a single tip, a magic word that vaults you ahead. In reality, the secret is an ecosystem of access. The advantage is built over years of relationships, thresholds, and timing. You cannot control their access. You can control your response. Not chasing, not mythologizing, not thinking one dramatic swing will save you. Shifting from reacting to a rumor to setting your own rules is how you take your power back. This is the turn that matters. Flipping the story from envy of advantage to clarity about your approach and why it works for you. What does that sound like in real life? It's telling your future self, "I only trade what I understand. I do not buy after a headline shock. If something leaps, I let it go." I look for businesses where information leakage cannot rewrite reality overnight. It's noticing the same unusual volume others see and choosing not to sprint after it because you have already decided that speed without context is not your edge. And when a friend whispers, "You did not hear it from me," you remember that borrowed certainty has a cost and the bill always comes due. Underneath all of this is a simple, steady idea for thinking clearly. Balance story with insight, feeling with fact, and always return to the core lesson you can hold on to when the screen flashes red or green. The most reliable way to learn is to anchor an abstract lesson to a tangible example, then step back and name the principle you will live by tomorrow morning. In other words, let a scene open your eyes and a rule keep them open. The insider's fortune is not just made on information, it is maintained by our reaction to it. When we crash into every rumour, we donate our calm, then our cash. But when we see the game for what it is, a room where some people stand closer to the bell, we stop taking it personally and start moving differently. The most subversive move you can make is patient, boring discipline. It does not trend. It does not whisper. It just compounds. So the insider trading secret is not a code to crack. It is a light to switch on. Once you see who hears the bell first, you stop chasing echoes. And that choice, repeated quietly over time, is how you keep your own clock. Picture a magician who never pulls a rabbit from a hat, only your wallet from your pocket. The trick happens in slow motion, and by the time you notice, the applause is already fading. That is the secret bailout secret. When a giant bank or a powerful corporation gambles and loses, a soft voice whispers, "Do not worry, we will make you whole." And it is not the voice of the market, or the shareholders, or even the executives who steered the ship into the iceberg. It is the voice of the public, told through government guarantees and rescue plans that quietly turn private mistakes into public debts. Here is how the trick feels when you are not invited backstage. You are told the system is in danger. If this one institution falls, jobs will vanish, savings will evaporate, lights will go out. That part is scary enough to stop questions before they start. Then comes the language that makes everything sound clean and technical. Liquidity, not solvency. Temporary facility. Special program. Emergency window. It is framed as a bridge to calmer waters. A simple loan against safe collateral, an orderly backstop, but the bridge is not built for you. The toll is you pay in ways that do not come with a receipt. You pay through higher prices that creep up while your paycheck stands still. You pay through taxes that could have built schools and hospitals, but now quietly service obligations created by promises you never made. You pay when competition shrinks, because rescuing the biggest players teaches the market that size is not just power, it is protection. Too big to fail becomes too big to fear consequences. The winners keep their trophies. Profits were private. Risks were private. Then the losses arrived, and suddenly they were civic. Assets stay locked upstairs at the party while the bill is sent downstairs to the people polishing the floors. Executive bonuses may get a haircut, a headline, a ceremonial scolding, but the core lesson too often remains. If you are small, you are disciplined by the rules. If you are large, you are disciplined by warnings. The secrecy is not always a cloak and dagger plot. Sometimes it is boredom used as a shield. Rescue programs are published, but the terms are dense and the acronyms could fill a dictionary. A guarantee here, a swap there, an off-balance sheet vehicle that keeps the mess out of view until the moment it matters. By the time the story is readable, the final chapter has been signed. You might ask, why do we fall for it? Because fear is quick and memory is short. Crises are loud, recoveries are quiet, and the next boom arrives with the promise that this time the risk is smarter. Models are better, the system is safer, and maybe it is until it is not. The real constant is incentive. If the people who take the risk do not absorb the loss, the game resets in their favour. There is another way to tell this story. Imagine a world where a rescue is not a gift, but an exchange. Help arrives, but ownership changes hands. Shareholders are wiped out. Executives are replaced. Pensions are protected ahead of bonuses. Profits after the rescue go back to the public, until the tab is fully paid with interest. Think of it like a fire department that does more than spray water. It also rebuilds and keeps the deed until the cost is recouped. In that version, the lesson is different. Risk still exists, but the gains are not only private and the losses are not only public. You are not powerless in this drama. You can demand clarity when you hear the code words. If something is truly a liquidity issue, the terms should be short, strict, and transparent. If it is a solvency problem, let the process be honest and consequential. You can press for rules that are not made in a panic but ready before it. Automatic clawbacks on past pay when a rescue is triggered. Cooling off periods that block the shuffle between regulator and regulated. Real competition that keeps any one failure from becoming a national emergency. Sunlight that makes it clear who got what, at what price, and for how long. There will always be storms. Systems fail, companies stumble, markets panic. But a safety net should feel like a net, not a trampoline for the same jumpers. The secret bailout secret survives in the fog of complexity and the rush of crisis. It fades when the terms are simple, the pain is fairly shared, and the memory lasts longer than the headlines. If the magician cannot borrow your wallet without asking, the trick stops working. And when that day comes, the applause will be yours.